Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into a world where the cobblestones are slick with fog. The air tastes faintly of soot and every corner of London seems to hum with secrets. You're wrapped in your coat collar up against the damp, watching the wavering pools of light cast by gas lamps that barely push back the dark. Somewhere nearby, a carriage rattles past its wheels, hissing on wet stone. Somewhere else, someone coughs a raw hacking sound before fading into the shuffle of footsteps. You probably won't survive this. Not if you breathe too deeply in here. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is right now. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're walking east from the Strand, where the last glow of shop windows has given way to streets the city prefers to forget. A gas lamp flickers above you, the mantles inside hissing faintly. These lamps first appearing in London in the early 1800s were a marvel of progress, or at least that's what respectable society thought. Down here they feel more like theatre lighting, casting the misery in soft amber tones. The fog tonight is thick, not the clean morning mist poets like to mention, but an industrial stew of coal smoke, chimney soot and river damp. It's heavy enough to muffle the clop of hooves. Even your own footsteps feel distant, like you're watching yourself in some grimy snow globe. From a doorway ahead you catch a glimpse of flash of bright silk. A woman leans in the shadows, the gaslight catching her cheek for a moment before she turns away. The silk's probably been mended a dozen times, but it's enough to draw the eye. You pass without looking too long. Here, stairs are currency. You turn into an alley where the stones glisten with something that's definitely not rainwater. The smell is sharp tar from the nearby dock's horse manure and the faint sweet rot of spilled gin. A rat darts across your path, tail slick as wet rope. Somewhere deeper in the alley someone laughs low, muffled, then cut short. Gas lamps, for all their glow, don't reach far into places like this. A few yards away the fog swallows everything. That's part of why these streets suited the trade just enough light for a meeting, just enough dark for discretion. Historians still argue whether gaslight actually increased crime, or just made it easier for the middle class to pretend it didn't exist. You pass a narrow side street where an old man in a bowler hat works the lamplighter's pole, coaxing another flame to life. It's strangely intimate watching the ritual, the twist of the key, the brief flare, then the steady glow. You wonder how many desperate deals have been made under that particular lamp, how many hurried conversations have ended when footsteps approached. A carriage rolls by its wheels, spraying dirty water onto the pavement. Inside, through fogged glass, you glimpse a lady in a feathered hat. She doesn't look out, whether from politeness, fear, or habit, you can't tell. Down here, eye contact between classes is its own kind of scandal. The cobblestones under your boots are uneven, worn into soft hollows by centuries of feet. Some of those feet belong to dock workers, some to clerks late home from work, and many, perhaps most at this hour, to women whose earnings came from these very shadows. The newspapers call them unfortunates, or fallen women. They call themselves simply working. A gust of wind curls down the street, bringing the tang of the Thames. You can almost taste the river mud iron, a faint chemical bite from the factories upstream. Somewhere along its banks tonight barges are unloading coal, and the men doing it are thinking about how to spend their shillings. For some, that thought will lead them here. You pause at a corner where 4 streets meet the lamps arranged like sentinels. On one you see a constable's silhouette moving slowly, deliberately. His beat takes him past 2 women leaning against a wall, and you watch the subtle shift in their stance enough to look less like they're waiting for someone, more like they're simply resting. The constable doesn't stop, just tips his helmet and keeps walking. That small exchange tells you more than any history book could. From here you can head deeper into the maze of alleys, where the fog will swallow even the sound of your footsteps, or turn toward the wider streets where the gas lamps glow brighter. You choose the alleys. The dark feels oddly protective, wrapping you in its soft sooty folds. A cat slinks along the wall ahead of you, vanishing between barrels. You think about how many lives have played out on these stones, quick meetings, long negotiations, arguments in whispers, the sound of coins changing hands, and then just like that, gone. No headlines, no memorials. London has a way of absorbing people without leaving a trace. A bell tolls somewhere low metallic, each note fading into the damp. You lose track of how many chimes. Time feels different here, stretched and slow. In the quiet that follows, you catch the faint murmur of a song, maybe from a pub half a street away. It's a cheerful tune, but sung with the flat weariness of someone who's sung it too many times. You turn another corner and the fog seems to fold in tighter. Somewhere ahead, another lamp burns weakly, haloed in mist. You head toward it, not because it's safer, but because in a place like this you take whatever light you can find. The glow ahead pulls you toward a narrow doorway with a sign that creaks in the damp wind. The paint's flaked away so badly you can barely read it, but the smell wafting out tells you exactly what's inside. The gin shop cheap, smoky, and already humming with the low din of voices. You duck under the lintel, shaking the fog from your coat like a dog after rain. The heat inside is immediate, thick with sweat pipe smoke and the sharp tang of juniper berries steeped in rotgut spirits. Gin's been the people's poison here since the 18th century, though parliaments tried more than once to tax it out of reach. That never works for long. When times are bad, gin finds its way to thirsty hands. The floorboards under your boots are sticky, catching at your soles. Somewhere to your right, a man slams his mug on the table and laughs at something that wasn't actually funny. The laughter here always has a slight edge, as though everyone's one bad comment away from a fight. Against the far wall, a small knot of women sit at a table meant for two. Their skirts brush the sawdust-covered floor, their eyes scanning the room in a slow-practice sweep. They're not here to drink for pleasure. Gin is liquid courage, painkiller, and negotiation lubricant all at once. One of them, her hair pinned under a once-fine bonnet, catches your eye for a heartbeat. Not a come-hither look, just a measuring one. You've already been assessed, priced, and probably dismissed. At the counter, the barkeep works with the speed of a man who's poured the same 3 drinks for 20 years. His apron's stained with things you don't want to guess at. The gin he serves comes in chipped mugs and cloudy glass tumblers poured from unlabelled bottles. Some say it's cut with turpentine to give it more kick. Historians still argue whether that's true or just temperance movement fear-mongering. You edge closer to the table of women just enough to catch their low conversation. It's not about customers or prices, it's about a landlord threatening to throw someone out and another woman warning about a constable with sticky fingers. The way they talk, you realise the gin shop is their office. This is where information trades hands faster than coins. In the corner, a small fire sputters in a grate, fighting the damp that seeps in from the walls. Above it, someone's nailed a handbill for a charity meeting promising rescue for the fallen. Nobody here's paying it any mind. A ratty dog curls up by the hearth, twitching in its sleep. You notice the way everyone gives it a little space, as if it's a long-standing customer in good standing. A sudden draught sweeps through as the door opens, bringing with it 2 sailors smelling of brine and cheap tobacco. Their boots track in the wet grit from the street. Immediately, 2 of the women at the far table straighten their voices, brightening into something rehearsed. This isn't luck, it's timing. The gin shop is where the evening begins, where strangers decide whether to keep walking or to stop talk and maybe pay for company. You step back toward the counter, letting the swirl of people and smells wash over you. The gin burns its way down your throat when you take a sip, hot medicinal, and more than a little rough. There's a faint sweetness under the bitterness, the kind that tricks you into a second drink, even as your stomach protests. From the back room you hear the rattle of dice and a cheer that's too loud to be about anything important. A man stumbles out clutching his winnings in a closed fist. One of the women at the table laughs, not unkindly, and says, "Don't drop it before you spend it." Gin shops like this were everywhere in Victorian London, sometimes only a few steps apart. The respectable newspapers like to print moralistic sketches of them, dark, smoky dens filled with criminals and the morally bankrupt. You can see why, but you can also see the truth. They were warm, they were cheap, and they were places where you could disappear into the crowd. The barkeep glances toward the door as another figure enters, a man in a long coat, with the look of someone used to being obeyed. Conversation dips for a moment, then picks up again. The man doesn't order gin. He orders beer, the mark of someone here for business, not pleasure. He speaks briefly to one of the women, sliding something small across the table. She palms it without looking, and the 2 of them vanish into the street. You wonder how many transactions like that happen in a night, how many begin with nothing more than a shared drink and a bit of quiet conversation in a corner. Outside, the fog presses against the windows like an animal wanting in. You know when you step back out there, the cold will hit twice as hard. Still, the gin's warmed you enough that you feel ready. You drain the last of it, wincing at the bitter dregs, and push through the door. The sound inside dulls instantly, replaced by the muffled hiss of the fog, settling back in around you. Somewhere behind you, laughter bursts from the gin shop again, then fades into the night as you start walking. You hug the gin's borrowed warmth and aim your feet toward the kind of place that never advertises and never needs to. The street grows narrower, buildings leaning together like gossiping aunties, upper stories almost shaking hands across the gap. You slip under a warped lintel and into a common lodging house, the doorway gnawed by time and too many shoulders. The air hits you first, damp wool, cabbage water, and a sweetness that might be soap or might be the memory of it. Your breath fogs, which is impressive considering you're indoors. Apparently the cold has signed a long lease. Right by the door sits a keeper with a ledger and a look that says he knows 300 ways to stretch a penny and none to spare you one. He gives you the once-over that everyone in this city has perfected: boots, hands, eyes, hesitation. You drop a coin into his waiting palm, the metal clinking like the bell of a small, uninterested church. He pushes a wooden token back your ticket to a space that technically counts as a bed, if you squint and lower expectations. On the wall behind him, a mildewed sheet lists house rules in careful hand: no fighting, no swearing, no bringing in strangers without paying. You notice the small print masterpiece cleanliness to be observed. It's adorable, like telling the Thames not to be wet. Past the desk, the first room is a low-ceilinged barn of bodies and blankets. A line of sooty candles throws light that seems tired of trying. You step around a puddle, whose origin is best left unsolved, and slip onto a gangway between rows of cots. You hear coins, whispering shoes being tugged off, and the soft click of a clasped locket tucked safely against skin. A woman near the end of the row coughs into her shawl. Another nudges her to lie on her side, a quick bedside manner learned by necessity. The mattress under your hand crackles a straw tick that's been refilled so many times it has historic layers like a pastry you don't want to eat. Bedbugs stage a modest parade, confident in their tenancy. You're not their first midnight snack, and you won't be the last. Joke one, you consider charging them rent, but you know they'd only pay an itch. In a corner partitioned by a curtain that's lost the argument with gravity, two women arrange a timed privacy, one more shilling for both of them, and a single candle stub. The keeper pretends not to notice. That's part of the unspoken service. In houses like this, the bed isn't just for sleep. It's a stage, a shelter, a bargaining table. Many lodgings rent in shifts, hot bedding through night and day, so the mattress is never cold, at least in theory. On freezing weeks, the place sells penny sit-ups too, a long bench where you pay to sit till dawn, no recumbency allowed. For 2 pennies in some streets you lean forward over a rope slung across the room, hence the famous 2-penny hangover. Historians still argue whether those rope rooms were truly widespread, or mostly a journalist's favourite horror story. But the image is stubborn, and if you look at that frame cord over there, you understand why. You edge into the next chamber where the ceiling has been ambitious and tried to become a bowl. The drip plinks with metronome patience into a pan, and someone has tucked a rag around the handle, as if the pan might catch a chill. On the hearth, a kettle mutters to itself. If you have a halfpenny, you can rent the boiling water and call it soup with the addition of anything edible you smuggled in. A woman pulls from her pocket a small treasure, a baked potato gone cold. She splits it carefully, half for her, half for the girl beside her, steam ghosting into the damp. Quirky tidbit to pocket on winter nights. Londoners sometimes use baked potatoes as hand warmers, cheap, portable and edible when your fingers thaw. You warm your palms near the hearth and pretend your face isn't drawn toward the potato with magnetic honesty. The talk here stays low, as if privacy can be performed by volume. You catch fragments, a warning about a landlady who weighs the soap, after baths a tip that a certain constable likes his palm greased and his eyes closed, a rumour about a new charitable refuge 2 streets over that will trade a bed for a prayer and a promise. Someone mentions inspections. Under the mid-century lodging house laws, the city is supposed to register and check places like this. Fresh air, clean bedding, separate space for the sick. Mainstream fact, the authorities did pass acts to regulate common lodging houses requiring registration and periodic inspections, a bureaucratic nod toward decency. Whether the inspector ever arrives before the ceiling does is another matter. You find your allotted cot second from the end next to a window that admits air as a theory more than a practice. The blanket is the colour of resignation. You sit testing the way the slats give and listen to the house settle a creak like a ship at anchor, a tired sigh from the walls. Above you, someone has scrawled initials into the plaster with a pin. You read a few MTS, then stop because the room doesn't need a roll call of ghosts tonight. On a shelf near the door sits a bowl of something sulphurous. The keeper swears it drives away lice. It mostly drives away hope. A woman with clever fingers demonstrates an alternative, combing a bit of peppermint oil through her hair and tucking it under a scarf. She says it stings, but keeps the critters uninterested, an old market trick learned from a midwife's cousin who swears by it. You file it away with the memory of lamplighters and the map of gin shops' small technologies of survival. A draught snakes along the floor, nipping ankles. Someone produces a brick from the hearth wrapped in flannel and slides it into the foot of a bed. You think about the economies of heat, how much a boiled kettle costs what a coal scuttle fetches, which nights justify the wild extravagance of a bath. Joke 2 in this house. A proper bath is like a unicorn, you've heard of it. You support it in principle, and you fully expect never to meet one. At the far end, a woman you saw in the gin shop bonnet with the good bones. Calm eyes counts her coins and makes the quiet calculation of whether to keep them or trade them for sleep. In the end, she pockets 2 and slides one toward the keeper for an hour in the partitioned corner. Not romance, not even comfort, just a small controlled space where the conversation is scripted and the ending predictable. You find yourself breathing more evenly at the predictability. The city outside is improvisation. In here, even the bargains follow rules. Above the hearth, someone has pinned a clipped sermon about modesty and a handbill for a temperance rally. The dogma curls at the edges from the damp, like it's trying to roll itself into a pipe and be useful. A man reads the sermon aloud with theatrical piety, then winks and pockets it to ignite tomorrow's fire. Joke 3, even morality burns cleaner than this coal. You stretch out and study the window where the fog presses like wool batting. Somewhere beyond it, a church bell counts the hour with bored accuracy. 2 cots over a woman hums a tune from a music hall, something cheeky about a coster, and his cart so soft it feels like it's humming through the mattress. The girl beside her recites the alphabet, skipping J and Q like they owe her money. The keeper raps the doorframe once the agreed signal for lights out, and the room's candlelight declines into a few smouldering wicks. As you settle, you take stock of the rules you've learned since stepping in, keep your shoes tied to the bedpost, tuck your coins deep, conceal your softness even deeper. If you must sleep, sleep like a fox, one ear open, one eye pretending. The straw rustles and the bugs insulted by your earlier rent joke send a delegation. You negotiate they can keep the pillow if they leave your ankles alone. Predictably, they counteroffer by ignoring you. You think about how these houses, crowded and cold, still form a kind of community. Borrowed bread, shared whispers. The woman who nudged the other onto her side, small graces stacked like kindling. Historians still argue whether common lodging houses were relief valves that kept the poor alive or traps that cemented their misery. In the quiet that follows the argument, the house breathes many lungs, one tired body, and you tuck your hands under your cheek, listening to the rain invent itself on the roof. The city outside keeps its appointments with fog and hunger, but in here the night has a fragile order, a price list, and a door that latches from the inside. For a few hours, that's a fortune. The lodging house fades behind you in the dim light before dawn, and you push into streets still slick from the night's rain. The fog has thinned a little, replaced by a grey wash that makes every building look like it's been sketched in charcoal. Your boots tap on the cobblestones in that slow, even rhythm the constables use when they walk. They beat an unhurried patrol meant to say, "I see you," without breaking stride. Ahead, the faint gleam of a brass helmet catches your eye. The constable is tall, wrapped in a greatcoat, his truncheon swinging at his side like it's part of him. His gaze drifts over doorways, alleys, and you. For a moment you're not sure if you've been marked for trouble, or simply catalogued as part of the scenery. The truth is, here those categories overlap more often than anyone admits. The beat is a ritual. These men, sometimes called peelers or bobbies, after Robert Peel, the man behind the Metropolitan Police, walk fixed routes, passing the same corners, the same faces, hour after hour. They're not meant to interfere unless necessary, but what necessary means depends on who you are. If you're a woman alone on a corner after dark, it could mean anything from a warning to a fine to a quiet suggestion that a coin or 2 might make the problem disappear. You hang back as the constable pauses to speak with a woman leaning in a doorway. Her skirt is short by respectable standards. Her shawl wrapped tight eyes, bright even in the dim. They speak too low for you to hear, but her laughter floats back, light practiced, like a shopkeeper's just browsing. She touches his sleeve before he moves on, and you notice she doesn't step away from her post. Business continues. Historians still argue whether Victorian police were more interested in protecting sex workers from violence or in controlling their visibility for the sake of public order. The official line was safety. The lived experience varied by the day, the officer, and the unspoken agreements between them. You follow at a distance, watching the beat take the constable past the gin shop you visited, then around the square where costermongers are setting up their barrows. The smell of oranges and wet wood mingles with the lingering coal smoke. He nods to one vendor, ignores another, and lingers by a corner where 3 women stand in the half-light. Their conversation stops as he approaches. Coins change hands subtly but not invisibly. On the far side of the square you see the rhythm repeat a slow walk, a casual glance, a pause at certain spots. The city is a living map of these checkpoints, places where watchfulness is as much about who belongs there as about what they're doing. One of the women peels away from the corner and starts walking toward you. She's older, her face lined, but her stride has the steady confidence of someone who knows this territory well. As she passes, she mutters, "Watch the one with the limp." You glance back and notice another constable younger favouring his right leg. She doesn't explain further and you don't ask. Information is currency, and this was a free sample, rare but never random. You shadow the patrol for another street or two, noting how he quickens his pace near the market but slows again by the boarding houses. You notice too the way women shift their posture when he's in sight, turning their bodies just enough to look like they're waiting for a friend or suddenly finding something to examine in a shop window. Quirky tidbits, some streetwalkers in the 19th century carried a pair of gloves or a small basket, purely as props, making it easier to claim they were simply out on an errand if questioned. You pass one now, a young woman holding a basket that clearly contains nothing but air. She meets your eye with the faintest smile as if to say, "You never know when you'll need a good alibi." A whistle pierces the quiet. The constable stiffens, then strides off toward the sound. You follow far enough to see 2 men squaring off outside a tavern, fist-clenched, breath puffing in the cold. By the time the constable arrives, the fight has dissolved into muttered curses and retreating backs. Still he takes names, jotting them in a small notebook. You wonder if those names will ever see paper again, or if this is just another part of the performance looking official, maintaining the illusion of the order. The patrol resumes, looping back toward the heart of the district. The constable tips his helmet to a passing matron, then barely glances at the woman slipping into the alley behind her. Respectable and disreputable pass each other like ships in a narrow channel, each pretending the other isn't there. You linger at the mouth of the alley, watching the gaslight from the main road spill a weak glow into the shadows. Somewhere inside, footsteps quicken, then stop. A door opens and shuts. Silence settles again. The constable walks on, already turning the corner. Mainstream fact to file away prostitution wasn't technically illegal in Victorian England, but soliciting in public was. That meant the crime wasn't the work itself, but being seen doing it in arrangement that kept everything just ambiguous enough for selective enforcement. The day is brightening, faint as it is under the soot-heavy clouds. Shop shutters lift costers, hawk their wares, and the beat moves into the daylight part of its cycle. More visible, more predictable, less dangerous in theory, but still sharp at the edges. You step back from the main road, letting the constable disappear into the bustle. The sound of his boots fades, replaced by the creak of wagon wheels and the chatter of sellers. Somewhere behind you, the women on the corner have resumed their quiet negotiations, the market's noise wrapping around them like camouflage. The beat will come back through in an hour or so, and when it does, the street will perform again, standing straight, looking busy, hiding in plain sight. Until then, the city belongs to those who know how to work the space between visibility and invisibility. You leave the constable's measured tread behind and slip down a lane where the fog hangs low and still like it's eavesdropping. Ahead, a doorway spills warm light onto the pavement, but this is no public tavern. You step inside and find yourself in a front parlour that smells faintly of rosewater, layered over something sharper, carbolic soap maybe, or the ghost of last week's disinfectant. The wallpaper is a once floral pattern, now dulled to the colour of old tea. A chair by the wall creaks as the woman in it straightens to greet you. She's not dressed like the women you've seen on the corners, no bare shoulders or cheap silk. Her gown is simple but clean, the fabric heavy enough to suggest she has a seamstress's help. This is the madam, the keeper of this house, and her smile is as polished as the brass doorknob you just touched. She sizes you up the way a merchant sizes up a potential buyer, quickly, thoroughly, and without apology. A small blackboard near the door lists house rules in looping chalk letters. No drunkenness, no rough handling, payment in advance, guests to leave quietly. There's a final line written in smaller script, ladies to take care of their health. You can tell by the spacing that one of these rules is enforced more often than the others. A clock ticks somewhere behind the parlour wall. From down the hall you hear a burst of laughter quickly muffled. You catch a whiff of perfume sweet with a musky base so different from the gin and laundry scent of the street that it feels like crossing into another world. The madam gestures toward a sofa and offers you tea. It's lukewarm and too weak to taste, but you accept. Part of her trade is making people feel like guests rather than customers. Historians still argue whether madams were protectors of their girls or simply another layer of exploitation. In some houses the rules offered real safety, no dangerous clients, no unpaid debts. In others the rules just meant the madame got her cut before anyone else did. This one seems to run a tight ship. Her girls are dressed neatly, their hair done, their eyes alert but not frantic. One passes through the parlour now, offering a polite nod. Her gown is trimmed with ribbon that's frayed at the ends, but she moves with the assurance of someone who knows her appearance is part of the sale. She carries a small fan, even though the air's cool, a prop as much as an accessory. Quirky tidbit, in certain houses fans weren't just for fluttering flirtations. A half-open fan might signal a girl was available, a fully closed one meant she was off duty, and a quick flick could mean a warning about a troublesome guest. The madam's eyes follow the girl until she's gone, then she leans forward, lowering her voice. We keep to ourselves here. The police know us and we know them. Trouble's bad for everyone. You nod, thinking of the constable's beat. Here the arrangement is obvious. The house stays discreet, the officers stay disinterested. A man enters a regular, judging by how easily he greets the madam. She asks after his wife, who by the sound of it believes he's working late. There's no judgment in her tone. Gossip is a currency she doesn't spend lightly. He disappears down the hallway, the madam's smile lingering only until the next creak of the parlour chair. She tells you the girls each rent their rooms by the week, paying her a fixed sum regardless of how much business they do. The rest they keep. Keeps things tidy, she says, and I don't have to chase anyone for my share. You think about the other system percentage cuts that can leave a woman owing the house even after a long night's work. Mainstream fact Victorian brothels range from grand parlour houses in wealthy districts to cramped, disorderly houses like this one in working-class neighbourhoods. The bigger, richer ones often catered to upper-class men, and offered dining music and even theatre. The smaller ones were less glamorous, but often more tightly run, since survival depended on avoiding scandal. From the hallway, a bell rings a small tinkling chime that sets the madam in motion. She rises, smoothing her skirts, and excuses herself. Left alone, you take in the room more closely. A bowl of flowers sits on the mantel, their petals slightly browned. The mirror above it has a crack in one corner, but it still throws back a flattering image in the low light. Even flaws here are managed to soften the view. The girl returns this one younger, her cheeks flushed. She heads straight for the washstand in the corner where a chipped basin waits. She pours water from a jug and swirls it with a bit of soap, the scent of lavender rising briefly before being claimed by the stronger smell of the room. She catches you watching and smiles not coyly, but as if to say, this is just the job. The madame reappears, seating herself with a satisfied air. The bell has stopped ringing. She asks if you've heard the latest one of the houses down the street was raided last week. No arrests, she says, but a fine was paid and a promise made to keep things quieter. She sips her tea, letting the implication settle in. This business silence is worth more than gold. You rise to leave and she doesn't try to keep you. Out on the street, the air feels colder after the parlour's warmth. You glance back once and see her standing in the doorway, framed by the glow of her own rules. In this city of corners and shadows, her house is both a refuge and a trap, depending on which side of the door you're on. The next street pulls you along like a thread tugged through fabric, and soon you find yourself in a narrow run of shop fronts. Here the light from the gas lamps catches on little bursts of colour, in otherwise soot-stained glass, a splash of red velvet, a drape of pale lace, a row of ladies' boots in sizes that don't match. You've wandered into the seam where poverty meets performance, the second-hand clothes trade which dresses half the city's working women in finery that's already lived other lives. A bell above the shop door jangles when you push inside. The air smells faintly of starch mothballs and the ghost of perfume that's clung to silk longer than to the woman who wore it. The floor creaks under your step, the boards worn smooth by 1,000 quick inspections and last-minute bargains. Behind the counter stands a shopkeeper with the alert look of someone who knows when to speak and when to let a sale walk itself through. He's folding a shawl, smoothing its fringe, though the wool is pilled and the dye uneven from years of damp. Still under the low glow of the lamp, it looks respectable. Respectable enough for someone who only needs it to last until the next rent day. In the corner, a girl is fingering the hem of a deep green gown, running the fabric between thumb and forefinger. The skirt has been taken up at least twice. You can see the ghost stitch marks if you tilt your head just right. It's not new, but it's silk, and in gaslight silk doesn't tell its age. That's the trick. Dressing for the street isn't about looking wealthy, it's about looking worth the trouble. Historians still argue whether fashion in the trade was more about attracting clients, or fending off police attention bright enough to catch an eye, sober enough to claim respectable errand if stopped. The answer, like most here, is probably both. You run your hand over a pile of gloves in mixed condition. Some are buttery, soft, others stiff as cardboard. One pair is clearly mismatched. Different shades, different wear, but together they make a statement. Quirky tidbit mismatched gloves were sometimes worn on purpose, to give the illusion of having lost one from a finer set, suggesting a careless luxury the wearer might not actually afford. A woman steps through the door behind you, shaking the drizzle from her skirt. Her hat is pinned with a single bright feather clearly salvaged from something grander. She greets the shopkeeper like an old friend pulling from her reticule a garment wrapped in newspaper. They haggle in low tones, he points out a tear, she points out the quality of the fabric. Eventually they agree, and she leaves with a few coins and a plain wool cloak, a practical swap for a wet night. The shopkeeper gestures toward a small back room where the better items are kept for those willing to pay. You peek inside a row of bodices with intricate beading a hat, with a veil still attached boots with soles repaired so neatly you wouldn't know, unless you flip them over. Here the price isn't just for the clothing, it's for the plausible story it allows you to tell about yourself. Mainstream fact pawnbrokers and second-hand shops were central to working-class life in Victorian cities. Clothes were not only bought and sold here, but also pawned for quick cash, then redeemed if fortunes turned. For some women, their wardrobe was their bank account assets worn into the street, then sold or pawned when rent or food came due. You try on a coat, the lining warm against your arms, despite the slight fray at the cuffs. The mirror shows a figure more confident than you feel, a reminder that in this world appearance isn't vanity, it's armour. The shopkeeper watches without comment, but you sense he's already calculated what you might afford. Another customer arrives, a tall man with a narrow face inspecting men's jackets at the far end. The girl in the green silk slips out the bell above the door marking her departure, with a cheerful note that doesn't match the quiet she leaves behind. You pay for a scarf cheap, but it hides the stains on your collar, and step back into the street. The drizzle has stopped, but the lamps still catch on every damp surface, turning the cobbles into a shifting patchwork of gold and shadow. Around you, other women walk with the same subtle transformations, a skirt caught, just so in the hand, a hat tilted for maximum effect under gaslight. Each piece of clothing tells a story, but only for those who know how to read it. The scarf warms your neck, but it also changes how you're seen, how you might be approached. In a city where work depends on being noticed by the right person at the right time, that's worth more than the shilling you just spent. You tuck the new scarf higher against your neck and follow a hand-painted arrow nailed to a lamppost. Midnight meeting, tea for women. The arrow points toward a hall that glows warmer than the street panes steamed with earnestness. Inside, the air smells of soap-damp wool and something vegetable that has been boiled until it forgot its own name. Benches line the room in 2 rows. At the front, a harmonium waits with its mouth open like a patient fish. A woman in a severe bonnet pats the bench beside her and smiles the way people smile when they've practiced in a mirror wide enough to encourage not so wide you fear for your wallet. You sit, and a tin mug of tea finds your hand as if by homing pigeon. It's sweet the way reformers think sweetness can solve anything. A plate with 2 hunks of bread follows. The bread is dense enough to qualify as architecture, but it's warm, and your stomach stops complaining long enough to listen. On the wall behind the platform, someone has chalked a motto in careful capitals, "A new start tonight." It's the sort of line that would sound ridiculous anywhere else. Here it lands with quiet force. A lady clears her throat and introduces herself as Mrs. Webb of the London Female Mission. You feel the room lean toward her, some in hope, some in habit, some because the door's draft is relentless. She talks about safety, about lodgings free from the rope and the bugs and the men who don't stop when you say the word. About a place in a respectable house if you're willing to work laundry, kitchen, sewing. You catch promises floating like crumbs hot, bath, clean nightdress, your own drawer with a key. And of course, daily prayers. There's always daily prayers. The second woman, younger and pink-cheeked, despite the cold, steps forward with a wooden tambourine tucked under her arm. Salvation Army, you guess, before she says it. The little red shield on her lapel gives it away. Mainstream Fact Time, the Salvation Army founded in 1865 by William and Catherine Booth, runs shelters and rescue homes all over London. By now, soup tonight, a bed if you sign the pledge, and in the morning an interview that may send you to a longer-term home. The pink-cheeked one, Sister Martha, starts a hymn, and her tambourine catches the beat with bright taps. Brass bands come out on bigger nights, but tonight the harmonium and a half-dozen voices will do. You clap along because it's the only instrument you can play without rehearsal, and because the rhythm is gentle enough to sit inside like a small fire. They aren't naive, at least not all of them. After the hymn, Sister Martha tells a story about a woman who came in last winter with shoes held together by string, how she stayed 2 months, learned to read her letters, and took a position in service in Islington. The specifics feel practiced, but the pride isn't. Across the aisle, a girl with windburned cheeks bites her bread and looks at the floor. You notice she's wearing mismatched gloves like the pair you debated earlier armour even here. At the back of the hall, a wooden table holds a ledger and a tray of small metal tags stamped with numbers. A volunteer explains if you want a bed, you take a tag, and when your number is called, you'll be led to the intake room. Simple, efficient, a little like being chosen for a team you didn't try out for. Right now you're just here for the tea. Joke 1. The soup looks so clear you could probably read the date at the bottom of the pot, but when a ladleful lands in your bowl it carries a brave carrot medal and 2 peas marching in formation. You eat it anyway. It tastes like warm. Mrs. Webb sits beside you when the singing softens. There's a bed, she says in a conversational murmur, and no questions we don't have to ask. You've heard that phrase before. It means they'll ask some questions, name age where you slept last night. Who to summon if you fall ill, but not the ones that bruise. Stay the night, she adds, and in the morning we can talk about possibilities. She says possibilities with a capital you can hear. Historians still argue whether these missions offered genuine exits, or simply exchanged one form of control for another, trading the danger of the streets for the strictness of rules, curfews and laundry shifts that left backs aching and fingers raw. Some homes were kind, others were kingdoms of starch and silence. You glance at the intake sheet pinned to the back wall. The rules are brisk, early-rising chapel daily language to be becoming no visitors, no gin work assigned by the matron. It isn't freedom, but for some it's a harbour. A handbill on the table makes room for another named Josephine Butler. Mainstream fact again, because it matters. Butler led the Ladies' National Association against the Contagious Diseases Acts, those laws that let police in garrison towns force medical exams on suspected prostitutes. The acts were suspended in the 1880s and repealed in 1886 thanks in no small part to her campaign. Rescue work and protest braided together. Sometimes the same women served tea at midnight and argued in Parliament at noon. Sister Martha returns with a stack of small booklets, their paper cheap and fibrous, the ink smudgy, the message clear. The war cry, she says of the Salvation Army's newspaper tuppence, if you have it a blessing, if you do not. Quirky tidbit. The Army's motto is blood and fire, which sounds dramatic until you learn it means the blood of Christ and the fire of the Holy Spirit. Still, you understand why some householders snatched their children inside when the brass band came round the corner like Judgment Day on a Tuesday. A woman beside you asks about baths very businesslike. The volunteer doesn't flinch. Yes. Hot if the copper behaves. Another asks what happens if she leaves after a week. Then you leave after a week, Mrs. Webb says, and you're always welcome to return. The answer is neat, but you hear the undertow beds are finite. Hope must be rationed with care. They begin to call numbers. A door opens to a narrow passage that smells of soap and steam. You catch a glimpse rows of narrow iron bedsteads, quilts, white as paper boats, a shelf with nightdresses folded into careful stacks. A matron moves among them with the lantern snuffing shadows before they can pry open old habits. A girl who took a tag sits very straight, lips pressed like she's holding still so her courage won't spill. You feel the urge to follow the counter-urge to run, and in the space between them lies the same old decision tonight's safety, tomorrow's cost, while you decide an elderly man in a black coat wheels in a magic lantern and a box of slides. He offers to show views of Jerusalem, then slides of temperance parables, the respectable man with a pint in panel 1, his decline in panel 2, his wife's tears in panel 3 and his miraculous rescue by panel 4. The children in the back ooh and ah at the city views. The women on the benches study the parables like weather maps looking for their own streets. Joke 2, The parable's villain grows a moustache between panels 2 and 3, presumably as a visual shorthand for moral collapse. You make a mental note to keep your upper lip tidy. Between slides, Mrs. Webb confides that the Magdalen Hospital moved out towards Streatham, and that some girls prefer at Garden's longer courses more privacy. She admits others hate the regimen. Some stay, some go, she says, hands folded. We're here whatever they choose. You wonder how many of those choices are really choices when rent day breathes down your neck like a badly trained horse. The hymn starts again, softer now, the harmonium sighing like wind under a door. Tea refills move along the benches. Sister Martha presses a paper ticket into your palm, not numbered, not a bed, just a promise of breakfast if you return in the morning. In case you get turned around, she says, as if the city were a puzzle box and not a hungry mouth. Joke 3, you ask whether the breakfast includes eggs. She grins and says, absolutely, if you can catch a chicken willing to donate. You'll settle for porridge and a second mug of sweet tea. You step back into the lane with the ticket tucked inside your glove. The hall's warmth trails after you like breath on a cold night. Behind you, the tambourine patters its last rhythm and the door thumps shut. You stand for a long moment listening to the city's two heartbeats, the one that sells and the one that saves, keeping the same time under different songs. The scarf from the second-hand shop still smells faintly of someone else's perfume. You pull it close, and you walk carrying a track that crinkles a ticket that promises starch and sugar, and the knowledge that for some, this is the first step toward a smaller, safer life. For others, it's a pause between corners. Either way, it's a light you can see from the street, and on long nights that's a kind of rescue all by itself. The street turns sharper as you head north, the air colder, the lamps sparser. Your breath comes out in quick puffs, and ahead a brick building looms with its windows dark except for one narrow band of light near the roofline. You've reached the kind of place reformers spoke about in cautious tones, and working women in bitter ones the Lock Hospital. The entrance is plain, almost shy of being noticed, but the smell hits you before you cross the threshold, a mix of bleach, wet stone, and a medicinal sharpness that coils in your throat. Inside the hall is narrow, floored with tiles worn smooth by years of shuffling feet. A nurse in a stiff white apron directs you to a bench without asking why you're here. You sit, and the bench feels as cold as the stone wall at your back. Women file in and out of the adjoining room, some holding shawls tight, others bareheaded with hair loose and tangled. A few are pale in a way that isn't from the cold. In the air is a murmur of coughs shifting skirts, and the soft clink of metal from somewhere deeper inside. Mainstream fact, the Contagious Diseases Acts of the 1860s gave police in garrison and dock towns the power to detain women suspected of being prostitutes, forcing them to undergo internal medical examinations for venereal disease. Those who tested positive could be confined in hospital for months. London wasn't officially under the Acts, but voluntary examinations encouraged by police or employers still found their way into the city. You hear the clatter of a tray and the swish of curtains. The door opens and a nurse beckons the next patient with a clipped "come." The woman beside you, dark hair, strong jaw, mutters, "Like cattle." She doesn't stand. The nurse doesn't insist. There are others waiting. Historians still argue whether these hospitals provided necessary care or were simply another way to control women's bodies in the name of public health. A doctor emerges from the room wiping his hands. He looks young enough to still be learning where to rest his gaze. His frock coat smells faintly of carbolic and tobacco. He calls for the girl from Holborn, in a tone that could as easily be asking for a misplaced parcel. When no one answers, the nurse moves through the bench line eyes, scanning faces like a ledger she's memorised. You're led inside, eventually past a partition, to a room that's both too bright and too cold. There's a narrow bed with a white sheet, a tray of instruments, and a smell that tells you the bleach here works harder than the tea at the rescue mission. The doctor's questions are quick, functional. How long have you been ill? Where have you worked? Who sent you? His voice is as brisk as his notes, though his pen scratches slower when you hesitate. Quirky tidbits, some women faked symptoms to gain hospital admission during the worst winters, not for the treatment, but for the bed, the food, and the brief safety from the street. The staff knew, of course, but in a city where freezing to death was a weekly headline, rules sometimes bent like wet wood. The examination is exactly as impersonal as you feared, hands and instruments that do their work without cruelty, but also without kindness. When it's done, the nurse hands you a folded slip of paper with instructions written in careful copperplate. Medicine's rest and avoidance of certain behaviours, as though survival and morality could be prescribed in the same sentence. In the ward rows of iron bedsteads stand like obedient soldiers, each with a folded blanket and a small table bearing a chipped mug. Some beds are empty, their sheets already cold. Others hold women staring at the ceiling or turning toward the wall. The air hums with low conversation, interrupted by the occasional barked order from a matron at the far end. You take a seat on the edge of one bed. The woman in the next cot nods to you, then glances toward the matron before leaning closer. She whispers about the last raid in her district, how the police came for our health, but left after taking 3 women for debts instead. Her laugh is short, more of a cough. She tells you the soup here is good on Wednesdays and terrible the rest of the week. The matron passes her eyes, sweeping the row. Her keys jangle like punctuation marks to her steps. She pauses to adjust a blanket on a patient who's clearly asleep, then moves on. The small kindness is surprising. You file it away alongside the cruelty. From the far corner, a girl sings softly an old ballad about a sailor who never came home. It's a song meant for the pub, but here it sounds almost like a lullaby. A nurse appears, handing out doses from a tray of tiny bottles. The liquid inside is thick brown and smells faintly of licorice. You drink it anyway, grateful for the warmth. The clock on the wall ticks loud enough to set its own rhythm against the murmurs. You realise you've been here less than an hour, but the walls already feel like they've been standing around you for days. When you leave, the nurse marks your name in a book and hands you a small paper-wrapped bundle. Medicated ointment, she says, and a reminder to return in a week. Outside, the air feels sharper, and the street lamps seem further apart. You tuck the package deep into your coat pocket, along with the knowledge that whatever your ailment, the city sees it not as yours, but as a problem to be managed, measured, and if possible kept out of sight. You walk away with the taste of carbolic still in your mouth, wondering how many of the women you passed in the waiting room will be back on the same corner by nightfall, and how many will disappear into the ledger as nothing more than a name and a date. The night has been chewing at you for hours, so when the hiss and clank of a steam whistle cuts through the fog, it's like hearing another language. You follow the sound until the station roof looms ahead, arched iron ribs and glass panels streaked with soot. The platform glows in sections, as if each lamp is keeping its own nervous watch. Inside, the air smells of coal smoke and damp leather, and the floor trembles faintly under the weight of locomotives settling into place. Trains are leaving tonight for Brighton, Bristol. Edinburgh names that sound like clean air and different trouble. You stand at the edge of the platform, boots just shy of the yellowing line, and think about what it would mean to step aboard. In Victorian London, the railway was the artery of escape, fast, loud, and indifferent to who you were before you bought your ticket. Mainstream fact by the 1870s, cheap excursion fares had opened travel to the working class, especially on Sundays. For a shilling or two, you could ride far enough to imagine starting over even if you came back before Monday. You watch a porter swing a wicker hamper up into the luggage van. Beside him, a woman in a bonnet clutches a small carpet bag, her knuckles white. She could be going to visit family, or she could be leaving without a backward glance. In this place, every departure has both possibilities. You drift toward the ticket office. The clerk sits behind a barred window, his moustache twitching in time with the pen scratching across his ledger. Destinations are listed on a chalkboard in precise columns, time train fare. Brighton for 2's 6D, York for 10's 8D. The numbers feel both close and impossibly far depending on the coins in your pocket. Quirky tidbit, some women who wanted to vanish, bought tickets to nowhere in particular, then got off after 2 or 3 stops, and walked the rest of the way, making it harder for anyone to trace them. You imagine the disorienting pleasure of watching the city dissolve behind you, station by station. A train bound for the coast is boarding now. Steam rolls along the platform in white curls, wrapping legs and bags alike. The whistle blows again, sharp enough to cut through any hesitation. You see a man jump aboard at the last second coattails flaring. A woman leans from a window to wave at someone who isn't waving back. You wonder if she'll regret that last look or be glad she took it. Historians still argue whether the railways truly offered women an escape from the city's traps, or simply delivered them into new ones in other towns. Work was scarce, wages lower in the provinces, and without references, even a fresh start could sour fast. But here in the warm glow of the station, it's easy to pretend the hard part ends when the wheels start turning. Near the tea counter, 2 girls in their early 20s sip from chipped mugs, their bags on the floor between their boots. They speak in low, urgent voices. You catch only fragments. He'll follow, not if we're quick, half now half when we get there. The older of the 2 has a sprig of artificial violets tucked in her hatband, maybe for luck. You buy tea, the tannin bitter enough to bite your tongue, and stand near the doors to the platform. Porters wheel luggage trolleys with the solemnity of undertakers. A boy in a messenger's cap darts between legs, delivering notes to passengers who read them with tight jaws before stuffing them away. You can feel the clock pushing everyone forward, tickets checked, bags stowed, embraces ended. The guard calls all aboard and the last stragglers hurry past. For a heartbeat you consider stepping in line, handing over whatever coins you have, and letting the rails pull you out of London's clenched fist. But your feet don't move. The thought of starting over is sweet. The risk of arriving with nothing but that thought is bitter. You watch instead as the doors slam shut and the train lurches forward, picking up speed until the carriages are just a blur under the station lights. When the steam clears, the platform feels emptier, though there are still people waiting for later trains. A man in a railway uniform sweeps the floor methodically, as if to erase the traces of the people who were just here. The girls with the carpet bags are gone. So are the violets. You step outside into the night again. The station's glow fades behind you, replaced by the damp, muffled dark. The whistle echoes once more faint now, like a reminder that escape is always possible in theory, if not in practice. You tuck your hands into your pockets and turn back toward the streets. You know the ones that never need a timetable to find you. The streets around the station spill you into a neighbourhood where the air smells of damp plaster and boiled cabbage. A long, low building looms ahead, arched windows peeling paint a doorway wide enough for a horse and cart. The sign over it reads simply, Workhouse. You hesitate at the gate. Inside, a woman in a grey dress stands with a ledger, and a look that could flatten a man at 20 paces. She's the porter, or more precisely the gatekeeper. In the workhouse, everyone comes in through her, and no one leaves without her say-so. A man in a ragged coat shuffles ahead of you, mumbling something about lodging for the night. She nods toward a bench by the wall. Wait for the master. Her voice is flat, neither unkind nor warm, just the sound of someone who's said the same sentence 1,000 times. The workhouse in theory exists to give shelter to those with nowhere else to go. Mainstream fact after the Poor Law Amendment Act of 1834 relief for the destitute was supposed to come through these institutions which offered food and lodging in exchange for labour. In practice they were designed to be so unpleasant that only the truly desperate would enter. Inside, the light is dim, filtered through soot-grimed glass. The air has that strange mix of cleanliness and decay, scrubbed floors, but unwashed bodies, boiled turnip overlaid with coal smoke. A row of wooden benches lines one wall each, holding men and women waiting for their turn with the master. Some keep their eyes down. Others watch the door like they might bolt if it opened wide enough. Historians still argue whether workhouses were cruel by design, or simply the product of overcrowding and underfunding. Either way, the effect is the same. They strip life down to its barest transaction. The master appears a tall, stooped man with a ledger under one arm and a ring of keys on his belt. He calls names in a bored voice, each one answered by a shuffle of feet. When it's your turn, he looks you over the way a farmer might assess a mule. Able-bodied, he asks. You nod. Then you'll go to the casual ward. The casual ward, nicknamed the Spike, is where you spend the night if you're not a permanent inmate. You follow a matron down a corridor that smells faintly of disinfectant. She carries a lantern, the light jumping over the bare walls. Your footsteps echo, joining the sound of others ahead and behind. The ward itself is a long, narrow room with iron bedsteads along both sides. Each bed has a thin mattress, a grey blanket, and a small wooden stool for boots. There's a jug of water at the far end next to a basin that's seen better decades. Quirky tidbit, in some London workhouses, casual ward inmates were required to pick oakum the next day, teasing apart old ship's ropes into fibres for caulking before they'd be allowed to leave. It was slow finger-bruising work, and deliberately so. You glance at the corner where a heap of tarry rope waits for morning. The matron points to an empty bed. You're here for the night. Lights out in 20 minutes. Her tone makes it clear this is not a place for lingering conversation. Still low voices murmur along the row as people settle in. You catch fragments, complaints about the food gossip about a girl sent to the infirmary, a whispered joke about the master's wig. At supper, you're given a bowl of gruel and a heel of bread. The gruel is thin but warm, and you eat it without thinking too much about flavour. Across the table, a woman with sharp cheekbones and wary eyes dunks her bread into the bowl, softening it until it collapses. Easier on the teeth, she says. The matron rings a small handbell and the bowls are collected. A few people curl up on their beds immediately. Others sit staring at nothing as if their eyes might find a way out before their bodies do. You lie back, the blanket scratchy against your chin. Somewhere down the hall a baby cries the sound sharp against the stillness. The smell of tar from the oakum heap drifts in, clinging to the air like a warning. Mainstream fact, the stigma of the workhouse was so strong that some would rather sleep rough than submit to its discipline. For women in the trade entering often meant losing what little independence they had, no leaving without permission, no keeping earnings, and no say in assignments. Joke 1, you imagine a pamphlet advertising the casual ward free bed, warm gruel, and the chance to dismantle rope for fun and profit and nearly laugh out loud, but the matron's shadow passes the doorway and you swallow it. Lights go out the room, dropping into a grey half-dark. You hear the rustle of blankets, the occasional cough, the deep sigh of someone already lost to sleep. You stare at the ceiling and think about the trains you saw earlier, about the missions with their tea and tambourines, about the gin shops clinking mugs. Each has its own currency, its own price. The workhouse takes yours in labour and in the silent agreement that you'll accept the rules for the sake of a night indoors. Morning will come with a clanging bell, the smell of porridge, and the oakum heap waiting. You roll onto your side, listening to the slow, uneven breathing of the room. In here, escape is as far away as the street outside and as close as the next time the master calls your name. You leave the spike at first light with the taste of thin porridge still hanging around, and the street greets you with a chorus of newsboys yelping headlines like gulls chasing a fish cart. Horrible outrage, shocking disclosure, downfall of a notorious woman. The words peck at you as you shoulder through, and one paper all but presses itself into your palm. You pay a halfpenny you didn't plan to spend, because some mornings you need to know what the city has decided to believe about you. The sheet crackles like frost when you open it. In the gaslight's leftover glow, you read paragraphs that purr with moral concern while licking their lips at the details. An incident in a low quarter, the writer says a young creature led astray. It's the same script as always, the maiden, the tempter, the inevitable descent. The paper calls her fallen, which is a tidy word for a long set of stairs. Since the newspaper stamp duty was repealed in 1855 and the paper duty axed in 1861, the city has been drowning in cheap print penny papers, halfpenny papers, scandal sheets that appear overnight like mushrooms after rain. Mainstream fact, those changes made mass circulation possible, so the working poor became not just subjects of stories but customers for them. You can buy your own caricature on a corner and read it while you warm your hands over a baked potato like last week's pocket stove. You drift toward a shop window where the illustrated police news spreads its woodcuts in a bloodless theatre of peril. Women faint mid-frame, rescuers arrive in heroic diagonal, villains skulk under respectable hats. The engravings are melodrama carved into black and white, just enough horror to quicken a pulse carefully shaved of gore to keep it on the breakfast table. Historians still argue whether this steady drip of menace protected women by naming dangers, or primed crowds to see them everywhere except where they actually were. A newsboy flips another pile of sheets and crows special. You glance down to a name that still stings, W.T. Stead. His maiden tribute of modern Babylon expose from 1885 roars in memory the one that argued girls could be bought like gloves and did in fact buy one to prove it. The articles helped push through the Criminal Law Amendment Act of 1885, mainstream fact again raising the age of consent to 16 and giving police more power to shut houses like the parlour you sat in under the Rosewater mask. You can feel the paradox tightening rescue and ruin share a handshake. Historians still argue whether Stead's methods saved children, or set the city's panic alight while making the very girls he named more endangered. You fold the paper and head for a tea stall. The vendor slides a chipped cup toward you, the tannin biting kindly, and you balance it on the headline as if the scandal might slosh. A cluster of clerks nearby reads the same sheet with furrowed brows calibrated to concerned. One of them clucks his tongue and says something about the social evil as if Vice were an errant draft to stuff with more paper. You keep your face still. The man in the waistcoat who swallows these stories whole by day swallows gin where you did by night. The city simply assigns him better curtains. Flip a page and you hit the agony column. Tiny personals scuttle down the margin like ants full of initials and codes M meet F. Under the clock the parcel is safe. You know these lines carry love affairs, runaway plans, debts, messages that have nothing to do with agony, and everything to do with staying ahead of it. Quirky tidbits, some women cut the column into ribbons to make rag curlers overnight, waking with hair that looked like luck even when luck had other plans. You imagine pinning H, right soon all forgiven, into your hair, and letting forgiveness spring loose by morning. Across the street, a poster for Punch shows a cartoon of a rosy-cheeked magistrate tidying the streets with a broom labelled respectability, while a woman in a shawl is whisked toward the gutter's edge. The joke lands with that half-pleasant sting. You laugh because it's clever. You stop because it's you. Joke 1, the magistrate's nose is so long you could hang a week's washing on it, Satya's energy saver. Back at the scandal sheet, an editorial sighs heavily about female improvidence, a phrase that has never bought bread. It recommends more workrooms and stricter watch. You think of the lock hospital's carbolic sting, the rescue mission's tambourine, the workhouse oakum heap the trifecta of solutions that scrub, sing and separate until a life becomes tidy enough to ignore. The writer calls for chivalry from men, and virtue from women a barter where one side is a poem and the other a prison schedule. You keep reading because knowledge is armour even when the armour itches. There's a court report about a disorderly house fined £5 names withheld. In the margins, an advertisement offers female pills for irregularity, that Victorian euphemism so careful it practically curtsies. Another promises complexion wafers to restore bloom to the faded cheek, which would be more convincing if the paper's ink didn't already bloom across your fingers like bruises. Joke 2, you consider rubbing the wafer ad on your face just to see if typography counts as blush. A headline booms about a river discovery, the kind that makes mothers read faster and girls fold the page. The article is cautious fact still forming like frost, but the suggestion is clear. A woman vanished, the Thames whispered. You remember the girls in the station with their carpet bags. You remember the slow-tilting rope in the lodging house. You remember how easily a name becomes a rumour, then an initial, then a silence. The paper prints initials kindly, but the woodcut shows a hat you could swear you've seen. A man behind you mutters that the city's going downhill, though he's riding it like a hired carriage. Another says Parliament should do something, which usually means do something to somebody else. You fold the sheet along its crease and watch the way words try to tidy a mess by naming it loudly. Mainstream fact folded in the ink in 1888. The press turned Whitechapel into a theatre of fear, printing letters said to be from a killer and maps of streets you've walked without an audience. The crowds came for outrage and left with souvenirs proof that a newspaper can be a lantern and a mirror and a funhouse all at once. Historians still argue whether that frenzy protected women with brighter light or made the alleys darker with appetite. You slip the paper under your arm and notice how many hands are doing the same charwomen. Clerks, a boy with bootblack on his cuffs, a woman with peppermint oil threading her hair under a scarf, just as you saw in the lodging house. The collective rustle sounds like dry leaves. Joke 3, you think, if every scandal sheet flapped at once, the city might take flight, though probably only as far as the next headline. When the tea is gone and the news feels too loud, you use the paper for something it rarely admits warmth. You slide a folded section inside your bodice to blunt the wind that sneaks down collars like a pickpocket. The trick is old as print, the city's most democratic insulation. The ink leaves a faint shadow on your chemise, a little black bloom that will wash out or won't. Either way, the chill pulls back a fraction and you breathe easier. As you move on, a street preacher thunders about Babylon, while a boy sells oranges by their dozen bright as small suns. The preacher's voice and the headlines rhyme in your head. Crime rescue fall reform syllables. The city repeats like a prayer. It's memorised but never understood. You walk between them, the fan signals and mismatched gloves and peppermint oil and rescue tickets and carbolic ghosts all keeping pace, and you feel the scandal sheet crinkle with your heartbeat. By the time you reach the next corner, the newsboys are already calling fresh copy. The city edits itself hourly. You tuck your paper deeper under your arm not because you believe it, but because it believes in you enough to keep you on the front page, as a warning, as a story, as a statistic, as proof the gaslight is still working. The fog lifts a little, and you keep going warm where the words press your ribs, cool where the wind finds your seams, moving through a city that writes you down and swears it understands you, because it can spell your ruin without looking up. You follow the shuffle of boots and the fizz of laughter down a side street where lamps skim light off wet brick. And there it is, the music hall, its doorway banded in gilding that's done more than its share of smiling. A man in a braided cap takes your coin and tears a ticket with a flourish, like he's dealing aces. Inside sawdust hushes the floor, smoke draws lazy question marks under the ceiling, and the room feels like a kettle, left just shy of the boil, ready, giddy, slightly dangerous. Benches stretch toward a small stage framed by crimson drapes, and above a gallery crowd leans over the rail like gulls over a fish cart. The chairman sits at a little table near the footlight's gavel-at-hand carnation in his buttonhole master of ceremonies and traffic warden in one. He raps twice, and the chatter tucks itself into the corners. A girl wearing a tin tray on a strap threads the aisle, hawking oysters, oranges and ginger beer with the stamina of 3 people. You file away the oyster smell, brainy cheap and everywhere, as proof that luxury and affordability once shook hands in this city. Mainstream fact by the mid-19th century music halls had burst out of pub back rooms to become purpose-built palaces of song and patter places like the Canterbury, the Alhambra, and Wilton's licensed under magistrates for music and dancing, with a chairman ruling the bill and drink woven into the business itself. The respectable came, the rough came, and everyone knew the choruses. A comic singer swans on in a frock coat as shiny as a new halfpenny, and launches into something about Champagne Charlie. The chorus built like a broad street you can't help marching down. You hum along without meaning to, and when the crowd roars, the refrain the room physically tilts, voices and beer breath lifting you in a foam of sound. The footlights make his face look like it's been toasted, and you realise why Gaslight is the performer's favourite liar. At your back, the promenade is doing its other quieter business. Men stroll as if they've mislaid their hats. Women lean with just the right angle of invitation. Barmaids, waiter girls float between tables carrying 3 pints in 2 hands and half a dozen conversations in their eyes. A woman you've seen on corners tonight wears a better hat in here. She looks like company, not street, and that slight change of noun shifts the price and the risk. Historians still argue whether the waiter girls were simply drink sellers or illicit front for illicit trade, and whether the halls expanded sex work or merely gave it a place with chairs and an orchestra. The chairman thwacks his gavel, the comic bows, and a serio-comic takes the stage cheeks like apples, voice like brass warmed by tea. She sings about a boy up in the gallery, and the gallery obliges by stamping in time a weather front of boots that rattles your ribs. She winks at a magistrate's box that is definitely empty, which earns a laugh big enough to count as a civic duty. Joke one, you clap so long your hands qualify for the 10-hour day. A man at the next table nudges a uniformed clerk and murmurs, "Back room." The clerk nods eyes on the stage as if appreciation alone could deflect suspicion. You notice a door to the side with a cloth pinned over the glass, and a waiter who never looks toward it, while always knowing who went through. Deals happen there of the friendly, the financial, and the sort you tidy away with euphemism. The house prefers coin over fuss, and the chairman prefers to thump his gavel for applause, not order. Songsellers work the aisles, arms strung with printed sheets. For a penny you can buy tonight's chorus, the line set big for singing and bigger for forgetting your troubles. Quirky tidbit, many keep the damp-stained song sheets after the show to line drawers against drafts or twist into hair for Ragcurl's economy with a backbeat. You watch a girl fold her sheet into a tidy packet and slide it inside her glove, mismatched like the set you admired under brighter lamps. A waiter girl appears with a tray of gin that smells less of juniper and more of determination. You take one because the hall knows how to talk you into it. The glass leaves a wet ring on your table that looks like a moon in puddle form. A gentleman with a rose in his lapel sets down a brandy and compliments your scarf. Yes, the second-hand treasure, like he's pointing out an art print. His cuff tells you he spends his lunch money in the West End. His scuffed heel says he walks home after. You give him a neutral smile you borrowed from a rescue mission volunteer and keep your seat angled toward the stage. On comes a lightning change artist, one tug, and he's a soldier. One shrug, and he's a cook. A spin, and he's a dowager, so convincing the front row bows. The crowd howls at the dowager's wink. The chairman winks too, proof that everybody here appreciates a well-placed falsehood. For a moment you forget the cold outside and the rope lull of the spike and the sour disinfectant of the lock hospital. Your laugh comes up easy and it feels like clean air. Joke too, you resolve to learn a quick change of your own, perhaps from Rent Due to Rent, who's she purely as a party trick. Near the gallery stairs stands a woman in a plain dark dress with a notebook, the kind of plain that reads respectable in large print. She watches the waiter girls, not the stage. A detective, reformer, a journalist hungry for a paragraph that will hum with moral electricity in tomorrow's scandal sheet. You remember Stead's thunder and the way headlines carry both lantern and match. She moves on, and a man in a soft hat replaces her plain clothes, you guess, by the way the waiter pretends not to know him. Another fact under the footlights. The halls skirt censorship by living just outside legitimate theatre. Double entendre blooms where scripts would wither. The chairman's job is to sprinkle water when the innuendo catches too bright. The serio-comic returns with a song about umbrellas and showers that is emphatically not meteorology. The audience leans forward joyfully complicit, and the chorus lands like a pillow thrown at a sleepover. Someone brings a small bouquet to the edge of the stage, artificial violets, like the hatband you saw at the station. The singer tucks them into her bodice with a grin that says she knows what violets get up to after midnight. You feel the town's circuits join Station Hall Gin Shop Rescue Mission, all of them exchanging current like a string of lamps wired to the same humming box. Historians still argue whether music halls offered working-class women a space of community and cash on their own terms or lured them with glitter while skimming their earnings and reputations. Much depends on who owned the lease, who held the gavel, and who stood by that cloth-screened door. You keep one eye on the door, one ear on the chorus, and both hands on your small purse experience's choreography. A ventriloquist arrives with a wooden sailor, whose grin suggests he knows too much about ports. The sailor says things no living mouth could get away with, the kind of jokes that slip past because the wood is doing the talking. You catch a line about oysters in months with an R and decide you're fine with oranges. Joke 3. The dummy laughs at his own joke and you envy him the arrangement, someone else moving your mouth when the rent man asks questions. By the time the chairman calls last orders, the room has cooled from boil to simmer. Candles gutter in their collars and the crowd's edges fray into yawns. You drift toward the exit with the tide passing the cloakroom where hats find their owners, and a pinboard where notices offer lessons in singing lodgings, quiet and employment, for steady females references essential. You resist the impulse to pin up your own note, references scarce backbone adequate. Outside, the street's dark, feels gentle after so much brass. The hall's laughter trails you like steam from a kettle, and the sawdust on your soles carries a faint circus smell into the night. You think about the chairman's gavel, about how it called the crowd to order, and for a couple of hours held off the city's larger, older drum. Your scarf keeps your throat warm, your ears keep the chorus, your eyes keep the memory of the cloth-screened door and the plain-dressed woman with the notebook. You slide your song sheet into your pocket for lining, and you'll step into the lane for luck, and the lamps ahead wink as if they too know all the words. You let the last chorus from the hall trail off behind you, and follow the river the way a needle follows a magnet. The air picks up a new vocabulary, tar-wet hemp bilge, the metallic breath of anchors cooling in fog. Your boots try for sea legs on the slick cobbles of Wapping, and every warehouse door feels like a mouth with splinters for teeth. Somewhere out on the Thames a bell clangs twice, and a low horn answers like an animal that doesn't care about sleep schedules. The dock gates spill men like a tipped basket sailors with rolled duffels, mates with pencils behind ears, boys with faces too young for the stories their sleeves already tell. Shore leave means coin, and coin means company beer boots, a postcard to a mother who thinks the weather was fine. All voyage may be an hour with someone who knows how to be kind on a timetable. You slide into a waterside tap room where ropes hang from rafters like molting snakes, and the sanded floor gives underfoot as if the tide got ideas. The sign outside promised grog, which is just rum politely watered, but it's also a password you belong here if the room believes you do. A man with a sky chart tattooed across one forearm nudges his mate toward a table. The ink looks like it was done during bad weather stars that wobble a compass rose that forgot one direction, but his grin is sunshine enough. Quirky tidbit sailors often tattoo "hold fast" across their knuckles, a charm for the hands that must grip when the deck gets ideas. You nod to his hands and he nods back, receipt acknowledged. A woman in a jacket that used to be a gentleman's tailcoat takes a seat at their table like she's been expected since noon. She orders beer in a voice that means she's buying the first and selling the second. Mainstream fact, by the late 19th century, the Port of London is among the busiest in the world, with the West India, East India and Royal Albert docks, swallowing and spitting out ships like a machine that never tires. That means wages flushing through these streets in thick, brief tides, enough for an evening, never enough for a season. You taste it in the air, that quick metallic scent of money-changing hands. A boy with a tray of oranges threads the room, the fruit glowing like harmless lanterns. Behind him, a trio of men in navy jumpers carry their tots like a joke they've already told. The Navy's rum ration exists because the sea hates straight lines, and courage arrives faster diluted. They talk loudly about a gale off Biscay and softly about a girl in Manila who could sing the same song in 3 languages. A woman at the next table replies in 2 of them badly but bravely, and somehow that's enough to get to laughter. You remember the music hall's fan signals. Here the sign language is simpler, hand to purse, palm to bar chin toward the stairs. You step outside to the quay, and the river breathes at you, a big old creature turning over in its sleep. Lanterns bob on mooring posts like patient planets. Down the way a crowd collects where a fiddler saws a reel quick enough to chase the cold. A soldier cuts through scarlet tunic, still the rule for home service brass, bright enough to double as a mirror. He wears the careless weight of someone off duty and almost off his feet. His moustache is waxed into obedience. Quirky tidbit to pocket, for years the British Army required moustaches. Soap wax and even beer could be pressed into service to make every hair parade ground straight. You can smell the soap from here, brown honest determined to lather. He meets a woman's eye, yours then another's, and angles toward a doorway painted the international colour of discretion. Garrison towns like Chatham and Portsmouth know this dance by heart, and so does London when regiments rotate through. You think of the acts that turned women's bodies into police paperwork in those very ports, and the campaigns that tore those acts up like old rope. Historians still argue whether the crackdown in naval and army towns actually reduced disease, or just pushed it into shabbier rooms with worse locks. Across the quay, a sign for a seaman's mission offers coffee letters, written for a penny hymns if you need the words, chess if you need the quiet. You step in for a minute, the room smells of lamp oil and damp wool, and the tables are packed with faces from everywhere. The Empire can point to men from Hamburg with careful wallets, Norwegians with salt still in their eyebrows, Lascars in blue jackets speaking softly in languages that flow like rivers you've never seen. A volunteer helps a sailor address a letter. He doesn't have the words for "forgive me" in English, so she suggests "I hope you are well," which is solder that works in any climate. On the wall, a notice warns against crimps boarding house runners who promise beds and wake you missing your coins, and lists the address of the Sailors' Home in Wellclose Square, opened some decades ago to give men a place without traps built into the pillows. Mainstream fact folded there, the Sailors' Home established in 1835 tried to keep wages out of the gin shop and men out of the river. Back outside you follow the glow to a beer house that lists beds up the stairs in chalk. It's nearly illegible, which is exactly the point. The bar keeps two kinds of glass clean and optimistic, and a woman with peppermint oil in her hair, remember that nightbug trick, laughs at the punchline of a joke you missed. A foreign sailor pantomimes soup by rowing an invisible spoon. She pantomimes later by pointing at the ceiling and tapping two fingers together. This city speaks with eyebrows when vocabulary fails. A man in a bowler too new for these streets pushes through the crowd. Stranger buyer. Thief of time. His coat's hem says clerk, his eyes say tourist. He stares 3 beats too long at every woman like he's counting coins he hasn't earned yet. He asks the barman for directions and gets the kind you give a man who needs to learn by walking. You feel the room's hackles rise for a second, the way dogs go still when someone they don't trust tries to pet them. Then the fiddler strikes up again, and the world decides to keep turning. You drift toward Limehouse, where lanterns throw smaller halos, and doorways hold stories with more slippery edges. In a window you catch a glimpse blue and white porcelain, a coil of dried orange peel, a painted fan pinned open like a patient moth. Sailors of every flag find their way here. So do women who can count in a handful of currencies and swear in twice as many dialects. Historians still argue whether the tales of opium dens and yellow peril were mostly the press looking for spice, or a genuine map of a small complicated neighbourhood. You step past one door that smells of sweet smoke, and hear only snoring, which suggests the truth is somewhere between headline and lullaby. Down on the pier a hawker sells hot eels and mashed potatoes, the steam rising like applause. You watch a soldier spoon eel liquor over the mash with the solemnity of a priest, then share the bowl with a girl whose shoes gave up the ghost 2 roofs ago. Joke 1, the pair eat so neatly you suspect they've been secretly training for a cutlery exam. You buy a baked potato from a brazier, hello again, pocket stove, and juggle it between palms while your breath fogs up the river view. A tug pushes past, hauling a barge stacked with crates bound for names you like to say out loud. Buenos Aires, Bombay, Bergen. You stand on a city's front porch and feel the world breathe through its letterbox slot. A sailor with swallows tattooed at each collarbone, one for each ocean, crossed he claims with cheerful inflation winks, and asks if you know the words to a shanty that will not help anyone sober up. You don't, but you fake the chorus with the confidence of a woman who's learned half the city by ear. Joke 2, your version contains a surprising number of references to oranges and umbrellas, which may indicate you've been spending too much time in music halls. Somewhere a fight threatens to happen, then decides it would rather be a duet of insults. The constable strolls by with that nothing-to-see-here lope that means he's seen it all twice. You note which doors close as he passes and which swing wider. The river slaps the pilings, an old dog wagging a heavy tail. Up the lane the seaman's mission bell tings softly for late prayers, and a woman counting her coins at a windowsill pauses, then goes back to counting. Choice is tonight's true small coin, and everyone spends theirs carefully. You turn from the water at last pockets, warm from the potato scarf, tugged up against a wind that knows your secrets, and take the long curve back towards streets where the uniforms thin out, and the faces look more like the ones from your lodging house row. Joke 3. You consider getting hold fast on your knuckles, then decide you already have just spelled in calluses. The river keeps talking to itself as you go telling the same old story about arrivals and departures, wages and wants, maps and mouths. And you walk not toward safety exactly, but toward a pattern you can read in a city that treats sailors, soldiers and strangers like weather always arriving, always leaving, always changing what the night will cost. Morning rubs coal dust into the sky, and you drift from the river's edge toward a building with steps rubbed thin by arguments the police court. A line forms under its cornice hawkers, with baskets, clerks with bored eyebrows, women who know the inside of this doorway like they know the inside of their own pockets. You pass a notice board nailed up by someone who loves rules. No hats inside, no dogs, no disturbances. There's no line that says no poverty, but the usher enforces it anyway with a look. Inside the courtroom smells of damp wool, stale tobacco, and a faint waft of peppermint oil from someone who learned your lodging house trick. The magistrate's bench sits high enough to see yesterday and tomorrow, with a wig perched like a sleepy cat. The clerk reads names with the precision of a man folding laundry, 1, 2, 3 done. Your eyes track a parade of obstruction, drunk and disorderly riotous behaviour sprinkled over women the newspapers call common. Mainstream fact, the law doesn't outlaw prostitution itself, but it does outlaw the public bits, the soliciting, the loitering that counts as obstruction, the keeping of a disorderly house under old statutes like the Disorderly Houses Act of 1751 and newer catch-alls in the Metropolitan Police Act of 1839 and Town Police Clauses Act of 1847. The gaps between those laws are where half the city survives. A constable testifies with the rhythm of a man reciting a bedtime story. He's tired of, I cautioned her. She persisted. She caused an obstruction. She used indecent language. His notebook appears like a talisman pages smudged to a grey, as dependable as fog. Joke 1, if he ever loses that book, the city might forget how to misbehave. The woman in the dock stares at the floor. When asked if she has anything to say, she says nothing, because anything often costs extra. The magistrate sighs, fines her 5 shillings or 7 days. She doesn't have 5 shillings. You can already hear the oakum heap rasping the skin from her fingers. You step back out before your own name has a chance to be invented, and drift into the corridor where the real negotiations happen. A constable speaks low to a girl whose scarf has the exact second-hand drape you learned 2 streets over. He touches 2 fingers to his tunic, the tiny choreography of a move along, that can also mean I'll look the other way if you look my way next time. Historians still argue whether everyday bribery, tea money considerations, whatever name the district prefers, was systemic, or simply the seepage you get when laws are written in fog and enforced in darkness. You walk, and the city writes the rest, a landlord who insists the rent is higher for no questions asked, a madam who keeps the magistrate's clerk on her guest list for roast beef Sundays, a constable who knocks twice on a certain door before remembering he's meant to be surprised. In one alley, a woman loops her walk in careful figure eights, because standing still invites an obstruction charge. Quirky tidbit learned on the corners, some carry a parcel string. Wrapped but empty, a moving alibi, I'm on an errand officer that weighs nothing and sometimes works. A man with cufflinks that wink like small lies asks if you know a quiet house. You name the price of that information in your head and decide not to sell. Some coins burn. Around the corner, a runner for a lodging house more crimp than concierge presses a card into your hand, beds and privacy. You've read privacy's small print. It often includes a door that locks from the outside. You hand the card back with the neutral smile you learned at the mission, and he peels away for a softer mark. At noon, the air greases with drizzle, and you duck under the awning of a tobacconist where 2 men argue about the age of consent. Their voices are laundry on a windy day, flapping far-drying nothing. They mention that Criminal Law Amendment Act of 1885, the one that raised the age to 16, and gave police sharper teeth for closing houses suspected of keeping young girls. Mainstream fact, and you can feel the ripple. ever since some brothels shut others scattered and more business spilled onto pavements already carrying too much. The men congratulate Parliament as if it's their niece. They don't notice you leave. By late daylight you test the edge of a West End square and the law changes without changing words. Here a gentleman's carriage stops beside a woman in a bonnet that could pass vicar's inspection. The constable across the way practices the ancient art of seeing without seeing. The bribe in this postcode is paid as club dues, theatre tickets, polite silence. Historians still argue whether the blind eye was favouritism by class, or just the geometry of policing more light where the poor live more shade, where the wealthy walk. You slip into a coffee room where the teaspoons clatter like typewriters and eavesdrop on a barrister, explaining how common prostitute is less a job title than a legal label applied at the magistrate's pleasure stick he once attached, easier to write down than wash off. He says something about precedent and grins into his cup as if he invented it. You invent silently the world where labels are handed out with the same care as sentences, then remember you're in the wrong building for that. A small drama plays by the door. A plainclothes detective with a soft hat and softer tread tells a woman he'll overlook last night if she tells him who's fencing, watches at the music hall. She weighs the offer, then the cost. The weight of being useful to the police often crushes the people it's placed on. She shakes her head. He shrugs the shrug of a man who can always find another lever. Joke 2, you briefly consider handing him a watch and asking whether this will speed the plot, but he doesn't look like a man who appreciates improvisation. Evening draws its own border. A publican pins a licence in the window, a little shield against raids. It shines like an amulet that works until the night someone important complains. In the alley beside a door with no number, accepts a sequence of knocks like a password. You remember the chairman's gavel from the music hall, how rules there felt like a game, and contrast it with this gavel, which lands on the table upstairs at the station and turns breath into fines. The two share wood. The echoes differ. The girl you recognise, Violet's once in her hatband, now a brass ring on her fourth finger, sidles up and shows you the ring. Husband, she says, smiling like a stage whisper. You know the trick a ring, sometimes brass, sometimes a bent curtain hook means less police interest, more plausible errands, fewer questions that start with, "Are you?" Quirky tidbit confirmed rings are theatre props with legal understudies. She tucks her hand back into her glove, mismatched as always, and walks on with the quiet lift of someone who hopes the prop will hold. A shout cuts the street, then footsteps, then calm. Two constables lead a woman away, not roughly, not gently. The crowd performs the ritual of pretending not to watch. You catch the woman's eye for a second. She doesn't ask for anything. You wonder whether a shilling slipped now would become the kind of interference the law notices, while a different coin pressed earlier into a different palm would have made this scene never happen. The calculus is exhausting. You add it up daily anyway. Night finishes setting. You take the long way to the square where the lamplighter once lifted his pole and made a small sun for you. Under that lamp a man offers protection, a delicate word that here translates to a tax with bruises when unpaid. You tell him you already tithe to one god and several magistrates. He grins like glass breaking and drifts off. Joke 3. You consider invoicing the universe for all the protection you've bought against the people selling it. You pass the court again just as a clerk snuffs lamps, leaving the room in honest dark. On the steps, a woman counts her last coins with the concentration of a surgeon. You know the ledger she's writing in fines rent, rope bed, baked potato, peppermint tea, perhaps a ticket to the mission, if the copper behaves. You also know the scribbled margin, what you paid in silence, what you paid in steps, what you paid to stay in the grey where you can breathe. In the morning, someone will chalk fresh rules on a board. By noon, someone will show you where they bend. You drift from the courthouse steps into a quieter street, where the windows throw small pools of lamplight, and a stationer's bell gives a polite ding as you push in. The shop smells of ink gum Arabic, and the faint vanilla of paper that's waited too long on a shelf. The counter holds a little forest of steel nibs, a pyramid of envelopes, a neat stack of blue-ruled sheets with faint marbling at the edge like calm water. The proprietor gestures you toward the writing desk by the window blotter, fresh sand shaker standing by like a tiny hourglass that believes in manners. You sit, and for a moment the city goes still. The scratch of the nib is a soft animal sound, comforting and a little shy. "Dear ma'am," you begin, then you stop, because the nib stutters on ma'am as if it knows you're about to lie by omission. The copper plate you learned at a charity school returns in fragments, curlicues wobbling when the truth tries to poke through. You write about the weather because the weather is honest. You mention oranges because the colour feels safe. You remark on your situation a word so vague it can carry anything if you hold your breath. Joke 1, you briefly consider adding a pie recipe to pad things out. Then remember, you can't afford the ingredients or the fiction. Mainstream fact steadies your hand after Rowland Hill's postal reforms. Britain launched the penny post in 1840, the world's first adhesive stamp, the penny black with the Queen's calm profile, making it possible for you to send this letter anywhere in the country for a single coin. Distance no longer punishes the writer. It just asks for neat addressing and a steady tongue on the gummed edge. You lick an envelope and taste schoolroom glue. The stamp presses down with a small satisfying click like fastening a thought. You cross-write the page to save space lines at right angles, letter knitting over letter until your news looks like a lattice crust. Cross-writing started to make postage cheaper before 1840, but the habit stuck. Old economies get into the bones. Your eyes blur at your own handwriting, which is perhaps the point. You tuck a shred of ribbon into the fold blue from the second-hand shop, something pretty that won't invite questions. You do not enclose coins, not because you're unwilling, but because your purse has already practiced disappointment today. At the next table, a girl dictates to the proprietor's daughter, who writes with that brisk accuracy only teenagers can achieve. The girl wants to send word to a sister in Leeds. Tell her I'm well, she says, and that the work is at the laundry. A pause. Tell her I'm saving. The nib pauses too compassionate enough to add nothing. Historians still argue whether women in your trade kept close ties with family or severed them clean. Archives hold both kinds of letters, some stuffed with remittances and hope, some never finished, never posted, found folded 3 times in a bodice, after a body reached the wrong ledger. You buy 2 sheets and 1 envelope and borrow the desk a little longer. Dear Nell, you write to the friend you last saw near the docks, swallows inked at her collarbone to mark oceans she hadn't actually crossed. You ask if the sailor's home kept its promises, if the matron at Well Close still has the keys that sound like kindness when she walks. You add a PS about peppermint oil because bedbugs do not care about human drama, and someone should. You address the letter with the certainty of a guess. Outside a pillar box waits at the corner round and implacable. Quirky tidbit, the earliest pillar boxes were painted green, which blended so politely into hedges that people walked into them. By the 1870s, red became the rule, as if the post office finally admitted the city needed its instructions in lipstick. Tonight the box is red enough to stop a horse, and you stand with your letter in your glove, feeling like you're proposing to a very short, very patient magistrate. You lift the flap and feel the heat of a decision on your fingertips, then lower it again. Not yet. You fold the letter back into your pocket among its unposted cousins. There's the one that tells your mother you found service. You haven't the one that tells your brother to stop sending coins because you're fine you're not, and the one that asks a man to meet you at a railway platform you never reached. They make a little paper lining against your ribs warmer even than yesterday's scandal sheet. Joke 2, between newspapers and unsent letters, your wardrobe insulation could give a draper ideas. You walk towards St. Martin's le Grand, where the General Post Office stands like an altar to movement. In your mind's eye, the dead letter office hums behind some polite door clerks opening envelopes with thin knives salvaging the undeliverable. Locks of hair wrapped in tissue, pressed violets bruised brown from long travels, coins taped under flaps, addresses that read like riddles to Charlie the boy with the brown cap near the fountain. Some items return to senders, some are sold, some simply vanish into paper heaven. You imagine your ribbon turning up on a clerk's desk tied around a bundle of letters that all begin Dear Ma'am and all end in careful nothing. Back at the Mission Hall, tonight's edition, different hymns, same steam, you spot a table with a sign, Letters Written. Sister Martha again, tambourine holstered. She offers to write for you, no charge the script neat enough to pass any vicar's test. You thank her and say maybe tomorrow. On the wall hangs a sample postcard half-penny rate since 1870, cheaper than a letter, but naked. You don't put tender things where any postman can read them. Some sentiments need the privacy of gum and flap. A woman beside you shakes sand over a closing line and tells the volunteer, don't say London, say near London. The volunteer nods, adjusting the address to a village that will read near as far. The woman adds, don't write the street. She's not hiding. She's sparing her mother footsteps she can't afford. Around you the room fills with small edits, meant to keep love from catching cold. Tell him I'm well enough. Tell her the matron is decent. Tell them I'm eating. The nib obeys. The truth bends just enough to pass inspection. You finally carry your stamp and your courage back to the pillar box. The posting aperture gapes like a yawn. You think about the taste of carbolic at the hospital, the rope under your ribs at the spike, the tambourines tidy beat the constable's notebook, the madam's rules written in chalk, the violets that migrated from hatband to stage, the baked potato that warmed your hands like a small sun. You think of your mother's kitchen steam fogging the window, the kettle humming the same note as the music hall in a quieter key. You slide the letter in. It resists a heartbeat as if asking, "Are you sure?" then falls with a plush thup that sounds like a secret deciding to leave. It feels both lighter and worse. Posting a letter is an act of faith in timetables and strangers. Tomorrow, a man in a red jacket will shoulder your words like bread, hand them to another man, and your sentences will travel faster than your feet ever could. Mainstream fact whispered to yourself like a bedtime story. By the late Victorian years, London has multiple deliveries a day. You can write in the morning and get an answer by evening if luck and district agree. Time shrinks, then expands depending on who licks the stamp. You stand there a little foolishly like people do after courage has already been spent. The box says nothing, which is fair. It's busy. You almost drop the letter to Nellen after it. They'd think better. No address, just a promise. You'll find her by the docks, or you won't. Some news belongs to footsteps, not postmarks. Joke 3, you pat the pillar box as if it were a good dog, and immediately pretend you meant to lean. When you turn away, your pocket is thinner, your chest somehow both emptier and more lined. The city exhales with you. Somewhere nearby, a postboy's whistle twirls up a scale. Somewhere far, a woman sits at a kitchen table and unfolds her daughter's page along the creases, reading the weather and the oranges and the word situations, the way mothers always do with a dictionary no one else can borrow. You tuck your hands into your coat and walk on paper, rustling softly, where the unsent keep each other company, and the scent begins its long red journey home. You feel the year changing in your bones first, knees clicking like cheap clocks in January, skin going soft with river air in June, and the city adjusts its price list accordingly. In winter, you learn to walk with your shoulders up, chin-tucked hands, burrowed as if you could convince your body you're a smaller bill to heat. Nights lengthen until they feel elastic, pulling on you like wet laundry. Trade slows. Men spend their shillings on coal and boots, not company, and the alleys hold their breath. You queue for soup that tastes of everything and nothing, watching steam unwind from the pot like a magician's scarf that remembers better tricks. You do the old baked potato, hand-warmer gambit again, remember that pocket stove and the heat finds your palms the way good luck rarely does. Mainstream fact taps your shoulder. The Bank Holidays Act of 1871 sprinkled official time off across the calendar. Easter Monday, wit. Monday, the first Monday in August, and those days tip crowds into parks, beer gardens and the seaside with coins itching to be spent. Summer can feel like the city emptied its pockets into your hands if you can get close enough to the pockets without getting your fingers wrapped. Winter first. The fogs come down like theatre curtains and not the nice velvet kind. Coal smoke laces the air until every breath tastes like you're chewing a pencil. Some nights the pea soupers are so thick even the gas lamps give up and light only their own halos. Historians still argue whether the winter trade truly rises with the extra dark or collapses under it. Ledgers mutter both answers. What you know is simple cold slows decision-making, and men who can't feel their noses negotiate badly. You move not quite pacing because remember obstruction on the charge sheet. You keep walking a little, figure eight your basket. That isn't a basket on your arm. Your scarf pulled to your cheek like a secret. The penny sit-ups return when coins run low and nights run long, rope slung across a room like a promise you regret leaning on. You try the rope once more and your back remembers why it hates nostalgia. The keeper makes tea out of optimism and a handful of leaves he must be renting by the hour. You warm your feet on the hearth brick past the peppermint oil old trick same bugs, and listen to the house breathe its frosty lullaby. Then spring sniffs around the door, and the city remembers how to smile. Fruit shows up on barrows like confetti rhubarb. Gooseberries, early strawberries, so red you forgive their sourness. The pawn shop sees your winter cloak again. You redeem it just long enough to wear it to the door and pawn it back before the light turns bossy. Quirky tidbit for the first hot days, vendors sell penny licks. Thimblefuls of ice cream served in little glass cups that are licked, washed badly, and used again a public health partnership between optimism and denial. You take one anyway. The glass is cold against your lip, the cream thin but brave, and for 3 minutes you belong to a better climate. Joke 1, you hand the cup back like it's a family heirloom because in this city every spoon and glass believes in reincarnation. Summer coins arrive the way swallows do suddenly in multiples. Sunday excursions clatter out of the stations at indecent hours carrying clerks and cooks, and the occasional magistrate without his wig to Brighton Margate Southend. You flow toward the piers on their return like iron filings to a magnet. Sunburned men in loosened collars loosen purses too. They've been drinking salt air and ale, and their coins are in a mood to see the world. You pick your spot under a street tree where the light turns everyone into a postcard. It's almost easy to forget the Lock Hospital's carbolic when the air smells of spilled beer and oranges. Almost. There's a trick to summer daylight lingers rudely, and anonymity is a night bird. You practice the art of looking like you're headed to your aunt's with a jar of jam. Voices carry, uniforms stroll more lazily but see further. Historians still argue whether summer's bustle shielded women in crowds or exposed them to more watchful eyes. You learn to love moving water. The hum of a music hall foyer, the churn of a park bandstand crowd the evening parade on a pier where everyone is looking at everyone, and therefore at no one in particular. The season in the West End blooms in May like expensive mould opera balls drawing rooms bursting. Mainstream fact again, London's upper-class season drew the wealthy into town, and money slopped over the sides into cab ranks, flower sellers, dressmakers, and every trade whose work begins when the carriages roll. You drift the perimeter where liverymen smoke and footmen crack jokes they can't tell upstairs. One night a coachman slips you a half-crown like an apology for the house he's tied to. Another, he looks through you as if you're an inconvenient reflection in plate glass. You take what the season spills and refuse what it drops with teeth marks. By late August, the East End empties in pieces. Families and single women alike make for Kent to pick hops whole streets, migrating to fields the city's lungs going green for a fortnight. You consider the trip wages by the bushel fresh air that tastes like forgiveness, nights in hoppers' huts that make the lodging house feel like a palace with opinions. Some women you know go work by day, flirt by the campfire, and come back with cheeks pinked by something other than gin. Others discover that wet boots and low pay wear down hope as efficiently as fog. You decide to stay this year following the money where it flows loudest, and returning to the mission for tea when it doesn't. Autumn makes a good liar, golden light on brick leaves crisp, the city acting like it's a respectable widow with tidy accounts. Then the wind shifts and you're pawning shawls for coal and humming snatches of music hall choruses for warmth. Charities announce treats and feeds, handbills promise Christmas dinners with beef and plum pudding for the deserving poor, a phrase that always sounds like a corset. You don't argue with hot pudding. You do notice who gets seconds and who gets sermons. Snow sometimes comes grudgingly more slush than storybook, but once in a while the rooftops wear hats and everyone remembers how to be 5. You watch kids slide on the frozen Thames steps, no frost fair anymore. 1814 took the last, and the river's embankments and warmer currents keep it moving now, but enough skim ice to make a mother shout. Your boots go from damp to tragic, and you line them with folded scandal sheets the only moment the papers actually protect anyone. Joke 2, you tell your left boot to stop reading court reports over your toes. It doesn't listen, and now believes itself a magistrate. Feast and famine don't travel alone. They bring cousins. Summer abundance means more coin, but also more hands reaching for yours runners, protectors, landlords who adjust rent to the weather with a straight face. Winter scarcity means quieter streets but sharper edges, constables with time to notice magistrates with less patience for loitering madams trimming their stables like seamstresses on a deadline. You keep lists in your head who to avoid in fog, who to seek at the bandstand, which corner gets the first evening warmth from a bakery oven, which copper thinks he's invisible under that lamplight he's not. In the warm months, you sometimes take the train to the shore not to flee just to skim. Shilling Day at the Crystal Palace, a band on the pier at Brighton playing songs you already know, from the hall's bathing machines like little moral caravans rolling women modestly into the sea. You don't bathe. You watch you breathe, you sell a smile to a man who wants to believe the whole day is a fresh start. On the way back, the carriage smells of salt and vinegar, and the sleepy happiness of people who've seen a horizon. You work the aisle softly, like an usher in a nicer theatre than usual. By January, you're back to counting heat sources like prayers, bakery vents, horses' flanks, a pub's door opening, even a tailor's goose iron when he turns his back. You talk to your scarf as if it were a pet. It's earned the right wrap your fingers around a mug so tight the handle squeaks, and trade peppermint oil tips with women who've survived more winters than you've had birthdays. Joke 3. You consider knitting your own fog from stray threads, and wearing that it would at least coordinate with everything. In all seasons you learn the calendar's real holidays, payday dry socks a night, without the cough a constable on another street the moment the lamplighter's pole makes your corner a little sun. Feast becomes a handful of coins you don't have to explain. Famine becomes a night when the rope is a choice you make instead of the only one left. Historians still argue whether women like you were pushed along by the year's weather, or by deeper tides, wages laws, the price of bread, the latest sermon in print. You nod politely at the argument and tuck another folded letter against your ribs, because whether or wages, the day still needs getting through. Summer will return. You can smell it even when your breath hangs before your lips like a small grey flag. When it does, you'll go back to the piers and the parks, to penny licks and bandstands, and men whose coins make the same happy clink in July that they refuse to make in February. For now you pull your coat close, pat your pocket to feel that rope scar of the spike fading, and walk toward the faint music of a hall that keeps a chorus ready in every season. The year is an old merchant, stingy generous, never predictable, and you've learned to keep change in your palm and warmth wherever words can be folded. You cut south along a street where the signs change languages the way the weather changes moods. A baker's window fogs its own panes, and through the breath you read worst in one script, boulangerie in another, and around the corner Hebrew letters like stitches holding the shop fronts together. You duck into a kitchen the colour of boiled tea where steam kisses the ceiling, and everyone's coat smells faintly of damp wool and faraway trains. At a long table, you share a heel of bread with 3 girls who have the same look you wore on your first night, chin-up eyes, fast vocabulary short. Rosa says the one with a ribbon pinned like a violet in her hair, paper petals brave anyway, from Lion. She taps her chest for Rosa points across the channel for Lion, and then at the loaf for more you pass it along. The second Anya tucks stray strands under a scarf that already knows about peppermint oil. She's from Łódź. She adds mouth shaping the Polish like a secret. The third, Mariana says, Trieste, with sunlight you can almost feel. You trade nouns like contraband bread bedrope. Here you've both grown. Doctor, you mime carbolic. And she pulls a face, constable, everyone tilts a little mission. You tap a tambourine beat on the table and Rosa laughs. No, you hold up a palm the size of a stop sign. The kitchen belongs to a woman who is everyone's aunt, and answers to no one's surname. She keeps a kettle that never empties and a ledger that never balances, because in this room credit runs on accents and winter. On the wall a card in careful hand says English lessons by the hour. Pay if you can, and below a shorter line, no men. You file that away under rules that keep the air breathable. Mainstream Fact stitches this street to a map by the 1880s and 1890s. Whitechapel and Spitalfields are crowded with immigrants, Irish earlier, then wave after wave of Eastern European Jews fleeing pogroms, Germans and Dutch ship workers, Italians with knives for chopping sugar, and hands for plaiting, straw Scandinavians learning the docks, and the occasional French or Belgian seamstress, who swears London's rain is more ambitious than Paris's. Petticoat Lane is a river of shouted bargains in half a dozen tongues. Wentworth Street's soup kitchens work like metronomes through cold snaps. You hear Yiddish under English the way a violin runs under a march. Anya unfolds a scrap of paper and points a street name, a lodging house. She has the token for a rope sit, but not the vocabulary for refusing the bugs. You draw a quick picture of a bed, then a better one of a bench, then a tiny noose to make the rope joke land. She gets it and mimes an aching neck. The table groans in international. Joke 1, you suggest the city should offer a 3 ropes get 1 blanket punch card. Rosa snorts tea through her nose and declares you wicked in 2 languages. The aunt produces bowls of soup thick enough to consider a vote. Mariana fishes out a bay leaf-like treasure and pins it to her bodice for luck. Quirky tidbit more than one girl here sews a coin into her hem before a risky night in emergency fare home or the tiniest amulet. Some pin a needle inside the waistband for the evil eye because superstition travels lighter than furniture. You offer your old trick peppermint oil against the Nightcrawl Brigade, and the aunt nods like you've passed an exam. A woman with sharp shoulders and a French frown steps in to post a notice parlour propriétaire and because clients can read too quiet house. She's a madam of the continental sort, all starch and rules, and a scent that could double as disinfectant. Historians still argue whether the French houses in London were cleaner and kinder, or simply more efficient at the same old account-keeping one school, praises regular doctors and linen changes, another mutters about passports held as collateral and fines for breathing too loud. You see the girls read the card like weather. Rosa traces a question on the table, police. You draw a tiny helmet and a larger shrug. Sometimes you say and mime sliding a coin the gentle art of greasing the beat. Language is a ladder where the first rungs are price, place and no. Everything else can wait. You teach them lodging and rope and oakum, and when you mime picking old rope apart they all howl because misery is multilingual. Mariana demonstrates two bob with finger and thumb, and the sort of grin that once convinced a guard to look left when the exit was right. You add magistrate with a face of long-suffering wig and they clap. Joke 2, you draw the magistrate's nose the size of a penny-lit glass. Even the kettle wheezes with laughter. Outside the market, crow's oranges stacked like little sun's herrings, silver enough to pretend at riches. Anya asks band, and you tell her about the music hall, the chairman, the gavel, the cloth-screened door, the fan codes, then show a half-open fan flick with a glance that means careful in any country. She gets it, because she learned to read rooms before she learned to read. Mainstream fact hums at the edge of the table. The 1888 Match Girls strike at Bryant and May showed what happens when East End girls stand together. Better, pay safer work proof that a crowd of thin wrists can bend a factory. It isn't the same kind of labour as yours, but the rumour of that victory breezes through kitchens like this, and makes bowls taste braver. Anya smiles at the story, then tucks her scarf tighter. Victories don't pay the landlady, but they do warm the back a little. A woman from Hamburg comes in, sets down a trunk the exact size of giving up, and opens it to reveal a small travelling pharmacy mustard powder, cloves a blue bottle labelled in a good German hand, and a tin of salve that smells like church and witches. She dabs your wrist with something camphorous that scolds the cold out. She mimes doctor, then shakes her head, then mimes lock hospital, then pulls a face universal for carbolic. You nod. Your throat tastes the memory before your tongue does. Talk circles to rumour's white slavery, the papers call it sensational stories, of girls lured onto boats and sold into foreign brothels. Historians still argue whether those tales mapped a widespread traffic, or worked mostly as moral panic with a few grim exceptions. You keep both possibilities in your pocket like flint and steel. In this kitchen the danger isn't a headline, it's a runner with a card that says privacy and a lock that clicks the wrong way. Afternoon slants toward gold. The aunt sweeps crumbs with the authority of a magistrate. Rosa pulls out a tiny phrasebook with parallel lines, English, French, German. She points to polite refusal, and you grin because London prefers rude truths. You show her how to say later while meaning never and no trouble while meaning you cannot afford this. Useful sentences are armour, pretty ones are for letters home. You think of your pillar box and the thup of courage and slip a spare stamp into Anya's hand, tiny black, the Queen staring like a chaperone. She tucks it in her glove, mismatched naturally, and pats your wrist. You walk them as far as the lane where the Hebrew letters tilt toward petticoat, and the air changes from soup to onions to oranges to wet rope. At the corner you mark the seaman's mission with your chin coffee, if you need to sit without paying the rescue hall with your palm tea and tambourines baths if the copper behaves, and the music hall with a finger drum work if you can sing or smile. You point toward a pillar box for letters they might actually send. You point toward the constable and then toward an alley that offers a curve around him. Mariana holds up her hand, palm out. Hold fast. She tries the English, wobbling the sentiment dead steady. You laugh gently, exhaustedly, and tell her it's mostly for sailors, but tonight it will do for everyone. Joke 3, you add that if she tattoos it, she should misspell one letter, so the city knows not to trust her fingers entirely. She wiggles them like they're already guilty. When they go as a small flock, close quick, pretending not to be new. You watch until the crowd eats them, then you step back into the kitchen steam for one more cup. The aunt pours without asking. On the wall the card for lessons curls at the corners as if reminding you that words like scarves need mending. You sip, think of the rope that won't have their necks tonight, the peppermint that will claim their hair, the stamp in a glove waiting for a sentence brave enough to use it, and the way London's languages braid into one long instruction: keep moving, keep learning, keep your coin in the hem, and your no in your mouth. Outside, a lamplighter lifts his pole and gives the street a small sun. You take that as vocabulary too. You leave the kitchen steam behind and climb a stair that tilts like it's had one drink too many. The banister is smooth from years of palms that asked little and were answered the same. A brass number 7 hangs on a thread of nail, and behind it waits the kind of boarding house you only find when you're not looking for a future. The air is soft with damp and old soap. Someone keeps camphor in a cracked saucer under the bed, as if the smell alone could be a nurse. The landlady, a woman with wrists like broom handles and a face ironed into kindness, meets you on the landing with a nod that counts as welcome and receipt. Quiet after 10, she says, and candles by the inch. She really does mean by the inch. A stub sits on a saucer bordered with notches like a schoolboy's ruler. Quirky tidbit to tuck away in some houses you pay for light the way you pay for ribbon. Measured trim the flame kept honest by arithmetic. Joke 1. You promise yourself you'll read fast, then remember. You do all your reading on scandal sheets and tea tickets. Inside the back room, life is folded small and stacked where it won't fall. 6 beds each with a quilt that looks like it learned patience one square at a time. A singer machine crouches beneath a shawl as if ashamed of the racket it made during daylight. A spool of thread rolls under your boot like a tame beetle. Mainstream fact by the 1860s and 70s sewing machines, often rented on hire purchase, multiplied in working class rooms, speeding piecework, but also pressuring wages downward. Faster stitches rarely meant fuller plates. Here the machine is a relic, and a lifeline mended lace draped over its arm like someone's modesty saved for best. On the sill sits a row of treasures, a blue bottle that smells faintly of peppermint. Remember that truce with the Nightcrawl Brigade, a wooden rosary with 2 of its beads replaced by polished seeds, a daguerreotype so rubbed you can't tell whether the man inside looks stern or shy. The cat, because there is always a cat, has arranged herself across the warmest boards, a marmalade ledger entry with the day's heat signed under her. Someone jokes that she pays rent in dead mice. The landlady replies not unproudly that the cat is the only tenant who never owes arrears. You meet the regulars in whispers. There's Bess, whose cough started as gossip and became a roommate. She works mornings peeling potatoes at a chop house, evenings mending seams so small you need a forgiving candle. There's Mrs. Crawley, who isn't anybody's wife anymore, but kept the title the way you keep a shawl after the weather changes. She knows every pawnbroker within 2 miles and can tell you which ones are honest by the way they say madam. There's Lottie older, with hair the colour of iron filings, and a laugh that rattles the window like a friendly rain. She calls this the slow house, not unkindly a place for women who still walk the edges, but choose the quieter corners now, who measure the night by how much light they spend. You lay your scarf across a chair it has taken on your neck's shape like loyalty and sit. The boards sigh, a tired animal settling. In the corridor the landlady moves like punctuation short steps, long silence short steps. She pauses at each door to listen for quarrels that need smoothing, and loneliness that needs a teapot. She's not a madam, her ledger lists beds, not bodies. But she knows the trade's timetable and she aligns the house to it: hot water when the streets turn early, quiet when the streets run late, a strict ban on men who call themselves protectors and mean the opposite. Historians still argue whether such houses were distinct refuges, informal networks for older or ailing women, or simply the same lodging houses seen from a later hour and a dimmer lamp. On the mantel a card advertises a burial club dues 2p a week. You feel your breath hitch at the word. Mainstream fact again, burial clubs were working class mutuals that promised a decent funeral, for members money toward a coffin, a plot, maybe a coach, if coins had been faithful. The clubs kept many families from pauper graves. They also spawned whispers that payments tempted neglect. Historians still argue whether those whispers were truth slander or the press rubbing alarum bells for readership. In this room, the club is simply a promise that the women here will not let each other vanish cheaply. Bess unwraps her evening's work silk flowers to be stitched back to glory for a hat you can almost see glittering under gaslight. Her fingers are quick and sore. Lottie warms a brick at the grate and tucks it to her feet, then tells a story about a sailor who tried to pay in foreign coins that turned out to be buttons. She kept the story, returned the buttons, and told the sailor to try the music hall where counterfeit belongs. Joke 2. Someone quips that if money truly talks, these coins were practicing for a career in politics. The brick wobbles with laughter and steadies again. You share a tin mug of chicory with Mrs. Crawley. Real coffee is for mornings when luck has manners. She shows you a little envelope of hair, saved from a sister you never met. Plaited hair worn under lockets worked into brooches has been London's quiet jewel for decades, grief braided into adornment. She strokes it once and slips it back in the drawer quick as a prayer. The candle throws a soft oval on the ceiling, and you wonder how many faces stared up and made the same private bargains: one more month of rent, one more week without the cough-taking route, one more night where the constable's notebook stays closed. At 10 the landlady clips wicks. The house's breath goes slow. Someone hums a music hall tune under her throat just loud enough to keep the dark from feeling impolite. You shift on the mattress, it isn't straw, not here. It's flock lumpy but willing, and count the springs like rosary beads with bare knuckles. In the bed beside yours, Lottie arranges her ankles like contraband and announces that tomorrow she's selling her old silk to a second-hand man if he looks her in the eye while he names a price. You bless her standards and pass her the peppermint oil for the road, a sacrament of the slow house. Later you pad down the hall to the scullery and meet the landlady rinsing cups in water that's made peace with being lukewarm. She nods at the candle. You've another inch if you need it. You smile and say the dark is fine. It's the noise you're tired of. She snorts softly complicity without confession and points with her chin to a small tin on the shelf, raisins hoarded for birthdays that don't always remember to show. Take 2, she says, so I'll know I've counted wrong. Joke 3, you choose 3 and promise to lie if she audits. Back in the room, the cat has relocated to your pillow with the authority of a landlord. You scoot, she scoots, you compromise, which is the house's entire philosophy in miniature. The candle lowers itself to a suggestion. Your eyes adjust to the shape of the singer under its shawl, the curve of Mrs. Crawley's shoulder, the rise of Bess's breath. It feels for the first time today like you're in a place that doesn't demand a performance fee. No fan codes, no chairman's gavel, no copper's notebook, no rope carving its signature into your ribs. Wind noses at the sash. Somewhere down the street, a clock tests midnight and decides to pass. Your mind inventories small safeties, the stamp in Anya's glove, the rope you didn't have to lean on tonight, the burial club card that means someone here will read your name out loud if the city forgets to. You think of the trains, the mission's tambourine, the Lock Hospital's carbolic ghost, the old trick of the baked potato warming your palms, remember, and how this room, for all its thin walls and thinner quilts, feels like a slow harbour where tide and time have agreed to behave. Before sleep you pull from your pocket the letter you didn't send and the one you did. The posted one is gone, travelling red routes you'll never see. The other you smooth flat, then slide under the mattress with the cat's tolerant permission. The candle gives up its last whisper. Darkness settles like a blanket that doesn't quite reach your toes but tries. In the room's hush, the house seems to listen with you, to the old lungs working, to the singer dreaming of seams, to the landlady counting raisins in her head and coming up wrong on purpose. End of line doesn't mean end. Here, it means rest measured by the inch priced kindly and paid in the soft coins of being left alone. You wake in the slow house to the landlady's knuckles brushing the door like a moth. 3 light taps a pause that asks for nothing. Girl from the front attic didn't come back, she murmurs through the wood. The words already worn at the edges like coins that have passed too many hands. Lottie's eyes open across the room. Bess coughs then doesn't. No one says a name. Names fray when they're pulled too often. Down on the landing, the burial club card watches you like a quiet aunt. 2 pence a week for a promise that doesn't have to be asked twice. You take the stairs sideways so the tilt doesn't throw you, and the cat who has paid her rent in mice and warmth threads your legs like punctuation. Outside morning has scoured the sky but left the streets unwashed. Word travels faster than post. She went for the embankment. She took a room near the Surrey side. She married quiet like ring and all. You follow the first rumour the way you follow a smell in a kitchen, not because you believe it, but because kitchens are where the truth likes to lean when no one is looking. At the river the air tastes of iron and last night's fog turned into a memory. Men in blue from the Thames Police move without hurry. They know the water's timetable is not theirs. A hook hangs from a boat like a blunt question mark. You look toward a little stair cut into the wall where the tide makes its case twice a day. Dead Man's Hole. Someone whispers the old place near the tower where bodies once were brought to be seen and claimed. Mainstream facts steady as a piling coroner's wrote, found drowned so often it might as well have been set in printer's type a verdict that folded despair and accident under one damp blanket. A boy with a basket of eels makes a polite detour around the blue coats, because even appetite has manners. No one says her name. You test the river's surface with your eyes as if it might give up an answer, the way it gives up a plank, a glove a hat brim gnawed to felt. The Thames has been called the silent highwayman. If he charged for lodging, he'd be the richest landlord in London. Joke 1, you put your hands on your pockets anyway as if the river might pick them, which to be fair it sometimes does by the simple trick of swallowing the people who carry them. On the embankment, a man sells photographs of bridges all sunlight and arches as if the river were mostly architecture. You turn away and walk east where the docks begin to talk in their sleep. This is where the second rumour lives she took ship. At a shipping office window notices promise-assisted passages to Canada, to New South Wales, to anywhere that needs clean sheets and harder hands. A clerk with a tie, like a moral principle, tells a line of women about situations overseas. Domestic service, good references, preferred a fresh start written in ink you can almost smell. Mainstream fact slides into your pocket. The later decades of the century saw ladies' committees and emigration societies organise passages for respectable women, sometimes including those from rescue homes. Historians still argue whether those schemes were lifeboats or broom closets, rescuers exporting the city's scandal under a more optimistic sky. Two girls in their Sunday best hold numbered tags like the mission's beds, except the bed is an ocean away. One twists a ribbon around her finger until it goes white. The other looks at the poster of a big ship and pretends she can already keep her balance. You catch the phrase farm families in Ontario and think of boots that meet snow up to the ankle, and doorways that don't smell like camphor and coal. You hope for them the kind of quiet that costs less than a candle by the inch. The third rumour is the gentlest knife she married. Quietly, quickly, registry office. No questions anyone wanted to hear answered. Civil registration has been the rule since 1837. You can sign your name in a neat book and walk out respectable if the clerk says so, and the witnesses nod at the right time. You pass a registry office in Holborn where couples go in 2 by 2 like animals in a story. One woman smooths her skirt, checks her brass ring, brass today, gold tomorrow, hope doing its usual neat magic, and smiles a smile that belongs to a home she hasn't unlocked yet. Quirky tidbits, some brides carried a sprig of rosemary tucked inside a glove to remember even at marriages meant to make forgetting possible. You wonder if the glove matched. You wonder if that matters. At a mission hall, you know a new board has been hung, missing friends. The Salvation Army pins cards with careful string names, last addresses the soft ache of please write. A volunteer tells you they've begun tracing families writing to provinces and parishes, hunting through post offices like their hedgerows. The cards flutter when the door opens, a small storm of longing. Across town, the Police Gazette, what used to be hue and cry, prints its own lists. Missing, women wanted men, the city's heartbeat in bold type. You think of your letter to Mam sliding red through the veins of the post, and you think of all the letters that never became stamps at all. You follow the fourth rumour, the one no one wants to own. She slipped, or she jumped, or she was pushed, and the river doesn't distinguish. Historians still argue whether the majority of the women in the coroner's ledger arrived by desperation by accident, or by something uglier performed in the alleys, where the lamps blink slow. The debate edits the dead. The river doesn't. At a receiving house of the Royal Humane Society, a plaque thanks rescuers who pulled breath back from water. There are names on it, and you trace a letter or two as if you might rub courage into your fingertips. Afternoon tilts, and the rumour about marriage grows its own branches. You see her face a composite drawn from every girl who has ever worn violets in a hatband at a scullery sink in Islington, sleeves rolled, learning to roast beef without setting the oven sulky. You see her paying into a burial club not because she expects to need it, but because she has learned that expecting is cheaper than arranging. You see her crossing a street with a shopping basket that isn't a prop anymore, nodding to a constable who doesn't recognise her as anything but Mrs. Someone who lives 3 doors down from the woman who sweeps. You see her sleeping without a rope to lean on, waking to mornings that require eggs, and quiet, not gin and quick wit. Joke 2, you try to picture her explaining peppermint oil to a husband who thinks bedbugs are a metaphor. May his ankles learn. But you also know the shape of the other ending because London teaches endings as faithfully as alphabets. Somewhere a coroner writes, found, drowned in neat script, and considers the price of carbolic soap. Somewhere a public mortuary opens a door for identification, and the curious pay a penny to peak grim tourism you wish were a lie. Somewhere the river police haul a body into a boat with the expertise of men who would rather be amateurs. Between those edges runs the path most women you know actually take, not vanished, not reborn but worn sideways into a different street. A new name perhaps shaved to a nickname, a bundle of letters tied with a ribbon that used to be blue and is now the colour of decision, a landlady who knows and doesn't, a cat that approves everyone who brings heat. You pass a pawnbroker and watch a girl redeem a shawl for the 3rd time in a week, disappearing and reappearing as finances permit. The city practices sleight of hand. You practice staying findable to the people who matter and invisible to the ones who hurt. In a tea room off the Strand, you meet a woman who disappeared 5 years ago and did not tell the newspapers. She sells dress trimmings by day and keeps books for a friendly publican at night. On her finger is a ring that began as brass and ended as gold, the alchemy performed by layaway and stubbornness. She still feeds a burial club and still carries a stamp in her glove out of habit. Sometimes I wake and the rope is in my throat like a letter I forgot to post, she says, and you both laugh because if you don't laugh, the room tilts. Joke 3, you tell her your left boot is a magistrate now from sleeping on court reports. She replies that hers is a vicar from trodding hymn sheets. The table approves. When you leave, dusk has sorted itself. Lamps bloom, the lamplighter lifts his pole like a conductor, cueing the exact bar where the music swells. You walk back toward the slow house, counting small anchor points. The mission's tambourine, the cat's claim on your pillow, the peppermint on the sill, the card for the burial club, the singer dreaming under its shawl, the stamp in your pocket waiting for a sentence brave enough to spend it. Disappearances are a kind of grammar here, commas ellipse, the occasional full stop, but most nights you and the women you know are semicolons linking clause to clause, keeping the sentence going. At the door, the landlady meets you with an eyebrow that asks and doesn't insist. No word you say. She nods the nod that means, then we keep the kettle on. Upstairs, Lottie hums. Bess sleeps on her side like someone leaned her there, and the cat occupies everyone's best intentions. You fold your scarf on the chair and place your letter under the mattress again, not hidden, just waiting for daylight that might know where to send it. The city edits, the river withholds, ships leave registry books close. But inside this small room, each name is spoken aloud at least once before sleep. Tonight you say hers quietly to the candle's last inch, and the flame answers by holding steady. By evening you're walking streets that have learned new tricks while you weren't looking. The lamplighter's pole still clicks in some lanes, but along the big roads the lamps don't hiss, they hum. A shop front gleams like a stage with a ceiling of filaments, and you catch your face in the glass, a second of daylight borrowed after dark. Mainstream fact to pin in place by the late 1880s and 90s, electric lighting pushes into London's theatres, and major streets, the Embankment, and parts of the West End glowing with currents that make gaslight look like candle gossip. The new light shows more, but it remembers less. It writes no stories in the air, just erases shadows cleanly as if that were kindness. You take the long way through a court that used to smell of fish and now smells of plaster. Somebody's widened it, squared it, taught it to behave. A brick plaque says Peabody Dwellings. One of those model sets of rooms where windows actually open and the drains don't sulk. Around Shoreditch Way, another sign points to a bandstand on a little mound, Arnold Circus, where the old nickel rookery isn't anymore. The city turned a slum into a circle and called it improvement. You stand in the tidy road and see behind the tidy the memory of rope sits and straw ticks and peppermint oil courage. Historians still argue whether clearance like that saved lives or only relocated them under a different ledger. But you know how names can be tidied out of existence with the same efficiency as alleyways. At the corner a crossing sweeper leans on his broom, the mud his business model, and the weather his manager. He grins and cleans you a path for a halfpenny with a flourish like a violin bow. Quirky tidbit, a well-placed hat pin. Long lethal fashionable has served more than one woman as a pocket guardian. You've seen a hat pin end a negotiation with punctuation. Joke 1, you consider hiring the sweeper to tidy your entire week. He says he only does pavements, not magistrates or landlords, and both of you pretend to be disappointed. You try for form's sake to follow the exact steps from your first night, the gin shop corner, the alley with the puddle that wasn't rain, the window with the shy candle, but the city edits itself faster than memory can footnote. The gin shop is a coffee palace now, tiled to within an inch of its morality. You step inside and the air smells of chicory and ambition. A printed motto, temperance is liberty. Glares across the room like a vicar who's learned to be wallpaper. The counter girl sells buns the size of second chances. Some nights you're grateful for a room where your coins buy sugar and not trouble. Some nights you miss the way a chipped gin glass fit your palm like a lie you'd agreed to. You pass a doorway where a madam once wrote rules in chalk. The slate is blank and the bell is silent. Next to it a grocer stacks oranges into a pyramid that wants to topple into summer. Tomorrow a man will peel one and remember a woman who made him laugh under a cloth-screened door. You'll think of her as a colour, not a name. You slide your hand along a brick warmed by a bakery's oven and feel the old cartography of safety. Eat here, shadow there, the magistrate's door 2 streets over the music hall's chorus like a rope to hold. On Fleet Street the scandal sheets have multiplied until the pavements rustle. The boy hawks a special on a respectable widow who turned out not to be. You hope she sells her story back for more than the headline paid. One page quotes a philanthropist who says there are fewer bad houses and more bad streets, which is a neat way to say the trade slipped the noose and learned to walk. You window read the headlines and tuck a section inside your coat, not to save, just to line your ribs. Joke 2, you tell yourself you're improving your posture with all this extra newsprint. Your spine, unimpressed, files a polite objection. You climb a stair to a gallery of photographs because the window promised portraits taken while you wait. A woman sits under painted ivy hands, folded eyes, fixed on a place just past the camera's shoulder. The old trick for looking like you've seen a horizon and plan to see it again. The photographer's assistant powders noses that sweat under nervousness. You consider buying a carte de visite of yourself, a tiny paper self, to slide into the letter you posted. Proof that your face once learned to stay still. You don't. Paper is a good insulator, but photographs burn too quickly in the wrong hands. Besides, most archives keep other women's faces. Yours will have to live in the cat's memory and the landlady's ledger. You turn toward the river one last time and stop at the wall, where the tide measures patience. A constable strolls with his notebook shut. 2 sailors sing a shanty with too many verses and not enough vowels, and the moon decides to show up late and unpunctual. You whisper names under your breath, the girl from the front attic, the one with violets in her hatband, the one whose cough got ideas, the one who can turn a singer by pure conversation, the one who knows the magistrate's wig only from jokes, the one who carried rosemary and married a man who learned to believe in peppermint oil, the one whose letter never found a stamp. The river keeps them, or returns them, or never knew them at all. You keep them anyway, because somebody should. On the way home you pass the mission hall. The tambourine is quiet, the harmonium shut like a polite mouth. A note in the window says breakfast at 6 and lists porridge as if it were a miracle by itself. Across the street a pillar box waits in its red patience for another courage thup, and you nearly write to none of the above, just to the city, from a woman who learned your corners, but you have already paid today in steps. Nearer the slow house, the familiar chorus starts up the singer under its shawl, clearing its throat. Bess negotiating with her cough, Lottie telling the brick what time it is, the cat arguing for eminent domain. The landlady has set 2 raisins on the mantel, as if the house had a birthday. You touch the burial club card and feel its steadiness through the paper. Small promises outlast large speeches. Historians still argue whether the word prostitute in a census or a court report tells truth, slander, or shorthand. You know a woman can be a dozen things between dusk and dawn, and none of them fit in a single box on a form. You lower yourself to the mattress and listen to the city's double heartbeat, the one that sells and the one that saves. In the half-dark, your scarf smells faintly of a woman who used it first. Your pockets smell of oranges and ink. Your palms hold the warm ghost of a baked potato. Your hair keeps a private note of peppermint. Your knuckles itch to spell hold fast, even if you never ink them. Joke 3, you promise your left boot if it's a magistrate to keep it out of this. It sighs solemnly and grants you bail. Tomorrow the papers will call someone fallen, someone rescued, someone respectable, and none of those words will buy bread. Tonight you keep names alive in the only archive that can't be cleared by committee, your whisper, your breath, your careful memory of fan signals and rope benches and song sheets turned into drawer liners and letters that learn to travel without getting lost. The long fade into silence isn't silence at all, you realise. It's the hum of a city that has swallowed 1,000 stories, and when you lean close, still lets you hear the echoes. You've made it to the still place at the edge of the map where the lamps pull softly and the wind loses interest. Let the city blur a little now, let the streets soften and turn from names into lines and then from lines into quiet. Breathe in slow and kind, and feel your shoulders ease. The night is generous when you ask it gently. The rooms you've walked through, the gin-warm corners, and the mission steam, the lodging-house rope and the singer under its shawl drift farther, as if the walls themselves have learned to exhale. You can set down the basket that isn't set down the paper lining your coat, set down the coin you keep in the hem for luck. They will be here in the morning, obedient, unhurried. Let the familiar comforts gather close. The baked potato's pocket heat glows faintly at your palms, not hot, just a memory of warmth that lingers and reassures. The peppermint thread in your hair becomes a small clean breeze. The cat finds the hollow near your shoulder and arranges herself with the confidence of an old friend. Somewhere a slow kettle tries a tune. Somewhere a tambourine rests its bright coins and sleeps. The rope you didn't lean on tonight loosens into ordinary line, harmless patient content to be forgotten. If a thought arrives, give it a chair and a blanket. Thoughts behave when they're made comfortable. If a worry insists on talking, let it speak in a softer voice, as if the magistrate in your left boot has requested decorum. You can keep the names you've carried, but let them curl into quiet too. No roll call, just the sense of company, like women who share a room and learn each other's breathing. In this dim light, everything kind lasts a little longer, and everything sharp decides it can wait. The air is easy now. It moves like the river on a windless night, steady and sure, the kind of pace that forgives. The lamp hums and then hums less. The bed allows you, and you sink the way a note sinks at the end of a song, no rush, only gravity and grace. When your eyes close, they close all the way. When your breath finds its rhythm, it keeps it effortlessly. You're safe in the small radius of your blanket, safe in the friendly geography of a room that knows your name, safer still in the lull of a city that for once doesn't need you to perform, only to rest. Sleep comes like a cat at last, like quietly, certainly and on your side. End of script. Sweet dreams.